It's time for TWiT This Week in Tech. It's a very special end-of-the-year episode. Steve Gibson, Paul Thurrott, Jeff Jarvis, and I will take a look back at the top 10 stories of 2020 and a look ahead to 2021. Next on TWiT. This Week in Tech comes to you from TWiT's LastPass Studios. Securing every access point in your company doesn't have to be a challenge. LastPass unifies access and authentication to make securing your employees simple and secure, even when they're working remotely. Check out lastpass.com/twit to learn more.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is TWiT, This Week in Tech, episode 802, recorded Sunday, December 20th, 2020. The year in review. This episode of This Week in Tech is brought to you by ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN is the world's #1 rated VPN by CNET, Wired, and The Verge. For 3 extra months free with a 1-year package, go to expressvpn.com/twit. And by CacheFly. Give your users the seamless online experience they want. Power your site or app with CacheFly's CDN and be 30% faster than the competition. Learn more at twit.cachefly.com. And by Zendesk. Zendesk makes software for better customer service. They help empower support agents and give them the right tools. You could say they're champions of customer service. Visit zendesk.com/twit to learn more. And by Forward Networks. Forward Networks reduces business risk by revolutionizing the way large networks are managed. Their advanced software delivers a digital twin of the network, a completely accurate mathematical model in software. Get a demo at forwardnetworks.com/twit. It's time for TWiT This Week in Tech, the show where we cover the week's tech news. In this case, the year's tech news. It's our last show of the year. Next week, it's going to be a TWiT Best Of. And we like to do on our holiday episode, always like to do something special. This year we thought we'd bring in the OG TWiTs, people who have been with our shows practically since the very beginning. Paul Thurrott, I hear you laughing.
I feel old.
You're an original gangster, Paul. Mm-hmm. Just accept that. OG. Windows Weekly started on this network when? I have to go look and see Windows Weekly.
2006.
Oh, gosh, you don't deserve to be here. You're practically a youngin'. It's only been 14 years.
We've only recorded 700 episodes.
Amazing. Paul, of course, the host of Windows Weekly. Really nice to have you. You're in Lower Mackenzie Township in Pennsylvania, where you're how many feet of snow?
We only got maybe 9 or 10 inches.
Oh, they got more in New York. Mary Jo got more.
Yeah, and it might rain on Christmas Eve and
that's
ruin
a bummer. Oh, that's awful. Also with us, I think he's the longest running TWiT host. Security Now started on August 2005, Mr. Steve Gibson, old timer. Hi, Steve.
Hey, everybody. Great to be with you all for this holiday episode.
Yeah.
Be fun.
From Orange County, where I think all the ICUs are full, so Steve, don't fall or stumble or anything. And the youngest member of our team, the host of This Week in Google, since August 1st, 2009.
Look at that kid.
2009, why that hardly...
I'm so happy to be at the grown-ups table at last. Paul, can you pass the cranberry sauce, please?
Yep.
I should have brought you turkey or something, but I figured you turkeys would be enough for this show. We're going to do this year, every year we kind of do this. We look back at the year gone by, and I think you three are actually perfect for that because between Security Now, Windows Weekly, and This Week in Google, I think you guys cover the waterfront. But what I've decided to do, and Jason Howell helped me out. Thank you, Jason. He pulled an all-nighter getting this all together. Is we just go through what I consider kind of the top 10 stories of the year and get your thoughts on it. Kicking it off with, ironically, I think this happened last year, the biggest story of the year this year is the story that just broke a week ago, the hack of the Commerce Department, the Treasury Department, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Energy, yes, the department that controls our nuclear arsenal, many localities, including the city of Austin, Texas, as many as 18,000 enterprises, the SolarWinds hack. This is a brand new story, so we probably don't have all the details. I know we don't. There's a lot more to come out of this. But over the last week and a half, it's really developed very rapidly. Steve, you spent Security Now talking about SolarWinds. But even since Tuesday, we've learned more. More importantly, maybe we've learned how widespread this hack is. How bad is it?
Well, everyone is calling it the worst hack in history. And of course, they're using the term in the popular press of an attack, but it's much more properly described as cyber-espionage. And it was bad because it was clearly by design. So, it's being attributed to Russia, and there are so-called indications of compromise, IOCs, which strongly suggest that they're behind it, that Russian state-sponsored cyber groups are there. I'm sure there is much less publicly known than is now known, in the depths of the NSA and the CIA. The very recent news is that there are some indications that SolarWinds was not the only point of entry. That is, they have found some commonality of indications of compromise on systems that did not have the SolarWinds Orion system in it, leading them to believe either that there was some lateral movement that was initiated through SolarWinds compromised networks, or that there was some other way in that has not been determined yet.
Brian Krebs quotes sources saying it might have been VMware that was a vector, whether related to the SolarWinds DLL hack of their Orion product or not. And the NSA warned way back in December 7th that VMware, we talked about this, I think, on Security Now, was being used to impersonate authorized users on the victim networks. So the authentication part of VMware was being used, VMware Access and Identity Manager.
So I think really the takeaway, one of the themes that we often discuss on the Security Now podcast is the truth that security is porous. It's got porosity, for lack of a better term. I haven't ever come up with one. And, it's the degree of porousness would be how hard you have to press in order to get yourself through a barrier. And so, there are things that are easy to do, low-hanging fruit is the common term, and things that are much more difficult. This was a high finesse attack where presumably Russians somehow got themselves into the SolarWinds network. They got access to the source code repository. That is, the on servers, there is source code for like this Orion IT management software. They inserted their Trojan code, merged it in with the existing source code, knowing that the next time the SolarWinds guys made some incidental tweak to their Orion system, and then rebuilt the software, that Trojan would be incorporated into the rebuild, which would then automatically go out to all the Orion customers. Once upon a time, there was a page on the SolarWinds site bragging about everyone who was using their stuff, and probably it listed all of the U.S. government agencies that they counted as proud customers. Well, that page is gone now. So consequently, when all of these customers updated their copies of the Orion IT management software, they all acquired the Trojan. The Trojan then stayed quiet deliberately for a while, and then it reached out to a deliberately arranged local IP. That is, the Russians also set up VPN endpoints around the world so that the Trojan wouldn't be seen making an outreach out of the country, but to somewhere local. So the point is, at every step of the way, I mean, this was not easy to do, but highly skilled hackers did it.
I read that the code they inserted, the backdoor code, was actually 4,000 lines. It was not a trivial thing. How could SolarWinds not have noticed a commit to their repository of 4,000 lines of malicious code and then just built the update?
As a fraction of the total SolarWinds code, it was still minuscule. So it was super tiny.
And how do we know it's Russia? Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said it was Russia. The president has notably said it's China.
Oh, Leo,
or
France.
France.
You can tell it's Russia. Look at the map that Microsoft published and notice that the only major country on it that hasn't been hacked
interesting.
is Russia.
There you go.
Well, Russia and Greenland, I guess.
Yeah.
Even countries in Africa.
The one other really important point I think to make is that we only know about this. Remember, this began, the first instance had a signed a SolarWinds security certificate signed on March 24th of 2020. We only found out about this because about 10 days ago, the Russians made their first mistake and did something that tripped an alarm at FireEye that then caused FireEye to say, whoa, what? And, how did people get in? And that's the only reason we know. This would still be going on. Wow. This kind of pervasive penetration into our into our highest levels of government networks, unless that mistake had been made, something tripped an alarm, and they probably did all of the other things they wanted to do before they decided, well, let's go, hope we can creep into FireEye and nobody will see us.
They were probably looking for hacking tools that FireEye had. And in fact, I think there was some evidence those were exfiltrated. Here's the map you were talking about, Paul, from Microsoft. It's either Russia or Burkina Faso. Could be Burkina.
Right. Madagascar is a little suspicious.
There's some candidates, but there's little. The purple is, I guess, where there's some outbreaks, and it is pretty much everywhere. And very notably, there's this big landmass called Russia that has not, but nor has Scandinavia.
Yeah, interesting.
I don't think the Finns are hacking our systems, though. China was hacked. The president says it's China. Pompeo says it's Russia. It's hard, isn't it? Notoriously hard to source these.
Yes.
So you can't be sure, right?
And it's also possible to set up fake outs where you deliberately leave some information that is elsewhere.
This happened when the North Koreans supposedly hacked Sony. The federal government said it's the North Koreans. You and I said, well, how do you know? And they said, we know, trust us, but we're not going to tell you how we know. And this is that same kind of thing. They're not revealing the information, but apparently Cozy Bear's fingerprints are all over it.
And what's really interesting, too, is if we assume that our intelligence, like we have hackers, too. We know that, unfortunately, from the public disclosures that we've had a lot of time discussing. It's interesting that our penetrations into Russian networks apparently did not pick up the fact that they had penetrated ours. That is, they're clearly keeping their cyber-espionage deliberately separate from the rest of Russia. Otherwise, we would have seen, because it would have appeared in their networks, stuff that they shouldn't have from ours, and that would have raised the alarm too. But that didn't happen.
Well, it's like the Enigma. When we cracked the Enigma machine, the British had to be very careful about the use of that intelligence because that would have told the Nazis we knew their codes and we were able to break it. So presumably the Russians have the same limitations on what they could do with the intelligence that they gain.
So, Steve, I'm delighted to be here with the expert of experts. How does the forensic analysis of what's been compromised work? How do you ever really know what has been seen? Is there any way to know that?
No. Well, okay, maybe. but not necessarily. One of the things these guys have done is and even the non-experts are repeating what the experts are saying, which is these hackers have demonstrated the highest level of skill. So, which is to say, they're as good as anybody. And it is notoriously possible to cover your tracks. Sometimes backup snapshots from will capture old logs. Right now, you can imagine that there is scrambling going on, retroactively looking at for traces that weren't appreciated at the time. So
there's rumors. There were stories that there were rumblings about this back in October. They got it in March. We think there were signs in October, but it wasn't until FireEye got hacked that we were sure. So part of the problem is that these guys have had 6 or 7 months to just wander around unobserved. They could have exfiltrated stuff. They've been able to cover their tracks. And I think there's even a larger issue of what other payloads have they injected in some. There's 18,000 potential sites, each with millions of endpoints. This is going to be almost impossible. It's like cockroaches. You can't eradicate it, right?
And so to answer Jeff's question, the famous hacker approach is you get into a system, you do a bunch of things, then you delete the logs that demonstrate what it was you just did, and hopefully get out undetected, so that even somebody who's looking at the log says, yeah, look, there's nothing here, nothing happened, because it is all digital, and it is all digital forensics.
And it's not backed up. So you don't offload your logs, so you have a.
Oh, you might. You might. That's I guess
right. So it might be that a snapshot of a server in the past would be able to show something. I mean, it is. You can imagine a lot of people's Christmas holidays. A lot of IT Christmas holidays just got wrecked.
There's and if with the Sony hack, they exfiltrated, they downloaded movies, terabytes worth of data. So I guess you might see unusual traffic, but it sounds like these guys were so savvy that if they did anything, they did it very carefully and probably were able to obfuscate it.
You really want to be surgical, because they recognize they managed to establish an incredible advantage. So the last thing they would want to do, for example, is to shoot terabytes of data out of some network connection. That's the kind of thing that would immediately trigger alarms. And, we do have cyber intrusion stuff. And it's, Einstein is the system that we've heard of that our federal government uses specifically to keep this from happening. And it just, the Russians know about it. And so they said, okay, let's, not trip Einstein up.
Well, the other problem is that it's notoriously difficult to catch what are called supply chain hacks. So true or not, there was that Bloomberg story last year or 2 years ago, I guess now, about the super micro motherboards that had rice kernel sized chips added to them as it went down the supply chain to put spy devices on there. Never found any proof of that. Bloomberg never retracted it. We really will never know what the truth is there. But that was a warning at the time. You got to be careful about your supply chain. You cannot assume that those updates coming from this, signed updates coming from a trusted security company are legit. And I do hope this becomes a warning to be more careful. But everybody I've seen talking about this says this is really hard. A supply chain hack is about the hardest to avoid.
So was the Huawei paranoia legit or politics?
Steve?
I have no firsthand knowledge, and it's again to Leo's point about that motherboard hack. Even if it didn't happen, we know it could have. There have been proof of concepts. You can bury a little microprocessor in the LAN network connector now, so that you don't even it's under the little metal shell that protects it from RF radiation, and you look at it, looks just fine. but there's something squirreled away in there. I mean, this is the world we're in today.
There's nobody that makes all their own hardware and software. So everybody has a supply chain. They have external suppliers. And I guess to some degree you need to trust them. Although Google has been promoting this zero knowledge architecture where you trust no one inside or outside the perimeter. But I don't, the GSA had done a survey a couple of months ago because they were concerned about this. This is not really a surprise to some. And they found that government agencies had done very few, if any, of the proactive protections that the GSA had recommended. These guys not only were not doing zero knowledge architectures, they weren't even checking for malware. They were just assuming the best. And so we were wide open to this. Now, the question is, maybe, I don't know if anybody knows this, but are we doing the same thing to them? And if not, why not?
Given the Snowden leaks and the WikiLeaks revelations, we really got a surprise with clear evidence of the extent to which our intelligence agencies have very actively developed espionage capabilities. So, and that was some time ago. So it's hard to imagine that we're not every bit as good as they are, and that, in fact, it's secondhand, but I heard someone say that Michael Hayden was asked about this whole issue of cyber espionage, and he said,
former director
so
of the
deep,
NSA, right?
Right.
Yeah.
He said, we are so deep into Russia's networks, I'm just hoping they're not as deeply into ours.
Was that braggadocio, or do you believe that?
Maybe prescience.
And Michael's a fan of this network, by the way.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah. We have to be nicer to him. We've said some mean things about him, I believe, Steve. So, no, that's. I think that's the problem is that cyber. This is the new form of warfare, right? It's not conventional warfare. It's not nuclear weapons. It's not armies marching and invading other countries. It's cyber warfare, and perhaps the saving grace is there has, just as there was with nuclear warfare, there has to be some notion of mutually assured destruction. That's what kept us from destroying the planet, was the knowledge that, well, if you fire nukes at us, we're going to fire nukes back at you and there'll be nothing left. If we are doing the same thing to them, maybe that's the only thing that's keeping them from doing things like, I have to presume if they're that deep inside our networks, they could screw with our financial markets, for instance, or the electrical grid, right, Steve? They may have capability. We've seen that they've been in the electrical grid for some years. They did a trial power outage in Ukraine a couple of years ago, and we think that was a test of capabilities. It may be the only thing keeping them from doing these kinds of acts of war is that we could do the same thing back.
Yeah,
I hope. I don't know.
What about non-governmental bodies, mafias, terrorists, bad companies, bad people, Bond villains? Is it possible to be that good with that, or do you need so many resources to be this good that it's only major governments that can do that?
We see evidence that we discuss every week on the podcast of individual hackers who are really gifted. So I wouldn't say it's impossible for it to not be nation state. You could imagine that there was some desire to sell this as requiring the elitist of the elite, just so there isn't a sense of like, oh yeah, anybody could have done this. It's like,
we had a guy in New Jersey basement.
We don't want to think that.
Well, there is a kind of a Pareto principle that most of the hacks, 80 or 90% of the hacks are performed by script kiddies who really don't have elite skills, no matter what they say. They're running scripts they got from elsewhere. We've talked on the show about ransomware as a service. There are a number of companies, I guess you call them companies, that offer ransomware service that you could subscribe to. There are a number of companies that offer DDoS attacks as a service. And so there are a lot of little low-level script kiddies around using this stuff. I guess, there are enough elite hackers around that any country that wants to could hire enough of them to be a threat, right?
Yeah, well, the other problem is the inside man problem. We don't know, for example, that it wasn't a programmer at SolarWinds, and I'm just making this up. I have no evidence of this. But who is in serious financial trouble due to gambling and was approached by someone who said, look, you're really in trouble. We've got plenty of cash. So we need you to add this module and we'll solve your problems.
A couple of months ago in October, you and I and Bruce Schneier and LastPass's CISO, Jerry Buchelt, did a really great, along with Red versus Blue attack panel. Actually, you weren't on that one, Steve. It was Father Robert and Shebert, where they attacked, they defended. And really, I think Schneier had the seminal quote from that event, which you should all watch if you haven't seen it, which is, there is no such thing as perfect security. You can layer it, you could do the best you can, but ultimately, nobody is impervious, especially if the attacker has limitless resources and limitless desire to get in. Would you say that's fair, Steve?
I think that's absolutely right, which is why I use the term porous. There is no wall which is impenetrable. It's just varying degrees of effort required to penetrate.
So at this point, I feel like it's no longer almost not a tech story anymore. At this point, it's a political story, because the next stage is diplomatic, is political, is our government and their government coming to some sort of détente. We've got the weapons, you've got the weapons. I don't think there's a technical solution to this. They're in there. They're going to be in there forever. I don't think you could ever say with any certainty they've been eradicated from the networks, right?
Well, yes, and it's, we know of a growing number of high-profile government entities which have been penetrated because we do have really good people there who are now able to look in and go, ooh, shoot. But we know that 18,000 somethings downloaded the update, and that update then did a phone home within a couple weeks of being downloaded. So within those 18,000, there are thousands of smaller organizations that are like, do we have anything here? Oh, we turned our logs off. Well, we don't really know, but probably not. Everything seems fine.
It's going to be a fun 2021 on security now. I'm going to move on. It's funny because that is a story we would have been doing on any TWiT. This is probably the biggest tech story of the year, so we brought it up here. And it's a developing story, and it's fresh. And I think next year we'll be spending time talking about this. I might imagine we will continue. It's not going to be the Steve Gibson show, though. We have other topics. Paul Thurrott, it's great to have you, Jeff Jarvis, and Steve Gibson. It's the original gangsta TWiTs.
The old guys.
Old guy.
OG stands for old geezer.
It's like those movies where aging Hollywood stars are in a movie together and they go to Vegas.
It's Ocean's 3. Yeah, it's going to be great. Can't wait to watch it.
We're doing a table read.
Lots of ageism jokes.
No, none of that will happen. We're going to talk about some of the top 10 stories of 2020 as we continue. Ironically, the number one story, I think, clearly of 2020 is this SolarWinds story, but we have more to talk about in just a sec. Our show today brought to you by ExpressVPN. You may not be able to prevent a supply chain attack, but you probably can prevent the spying from your internet service provider, logging the sites you visit, the searches you make. A lot of people say when we talk about privacy, hey, if you got nothing to hide, I got nothing to hide, no big deal. But I bet those same people close the bathroom door behind them. You don't want random passersby checking in on you, so why would you let people look in on you while you go online? ExpressVPN protects your privacy, protects your security, and it does it better than anyone else. I think by now anybody who's listened to our shows knows they want a VPN, both at home and abroad, but the question is which VPN? Because really you've got to trust the VPN, and that's why I recommend and use ExpressVPN. First of all, they're thoroughly audited. They use PricewaterhouseCoopers They vetted their privacy policy and they said, yep, ExpressVPN does not log. That's exactly right. They even vetted the trusted server technology that ExpressVPN uses. They're so committed to not tracking you that when you use an ExpressVPN server, it spins up in RAM just for you. It's dedicated to you. You use it. As soon as you leave, it goes away. Cannot write to the hard drive. It's sandboxed. So they couldn't log if they wanted to. And by the way, PricewaterhouseCoopers verified that does work exactly as stated. ExpressVPN is fast enough that you can use it to watch Netflix in the UK, even if you're in the US. It's secure, and it's totally private. That's why I use it. It's also very affordable. ExpressVPN is the #1 rated VPN, according to CNET, according to Wired, according to The Verge. They trust it. I trust it. Roughly $7 a month. Now, you might say, well, I can get a free VPN. Yeah, good luck, because if you're not paying for the VPN, they're paying for it somehow. So I suggest you want to pay a reasonable amount for the VPN. I think that's very, very fair. If you're like me, you believe your online activity is your business, you should secure yourself by visiting expressvpn.com/twit today. We got a special deal for you, 15 months for the price of 12 when you go to expressvpn.com/twit. 3 extra months free. expressvpn.com/twit. I trust them, and I think that's really the most important thing. They're a good company. And we thank them so much for supporting us all through 2020. We're talking about the top 10 stories of 2020. It's not a tech story exactly, except that there are tech elements to it. Of course, COVID-19. It's so funny. I was thinking back, maybe it was you and me, Paul, we were talking about CES. That seems like 100 years ago, back in January.
Different world.
It really does.
It was a different world. You didn't go to, none of you went to CES this year. I did, and I feel like I'm
Boy, super spreader.
I could have
dodged one.
I did dodge one, yeah. In fact, it could have been a really bad thing. We knew that some people at CES did have COVID-19, but it did not.
There was a late 2019 event in Boston, like a biotech event.
That's the one. That was a super spreader, yeah.
Yeah.
Was it over 300,000 cases, I think, Paul, that have been...
Yeah, that have been attributed to this, yeah.
From
crazy.
one relatively small conference in Boston.
And ironically, in a conference that probably should have known better.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think really the first kind of tremors from the point of view of the tech industry anyway were when conferences started canceling. I think the first was Mobile World Congress in March.
A bunch of companies begged out first, and then the conference followed, and that's when for us in the United States, it started to get weird, I think.
That's when we knew it was serious. Apple started shutting down its stores in China. Ironically, here we are almost a year later, and Apple is once again closing down all its California stores. The Tokyo Olympics was called off. Tony Awards called off. Burning Man called off. But in a way,
South by Southwest,
too, right?
Very last minute.
That was a big deal, right? Because South by did not want to cancel in Austin. That's in April in Austin?
April.
And I think Austin said, no, you better cancel. But this was a huge economic hit to the city of Austin. Lots of people coming to town, stay in hotels. They're all booked up. Restaurants are booked up. It's not just the tech festival, the interactive festival. It's also the music and film festival. That was a huge loss to Austin. But again, it all seems so long ago in the distant past now, because it just got worse and worse and worse. And yet coronavirus, COVID-19, was kind of a boon for some companies. The richest people in America made more money.
Well, and the companies that we all cover, Google, Microsoft, Apple, all the video game companies, this is a big year, you know?
Yeah. Zoom. Nobody really even knew about Zoom in 2019 unless you used it for work, and you probably didn't think twice about it. All of a sudden, it became a generic noun for getting online with people, used by schools, used by pretty much families, by everybody. Zoom.
And they had a bit of a trial by fire also at the beginning, because the rush to popularity brought the hackers who put a lot more pressure on the Zoom security than it had been subjected to before. And they stumbled a bit, but they've survived.
Remember Zoom bombing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was very smart to hire Alex Stamos quickly.
Yeah.
And they apparently listened to him and made a fair number of changes.
And also, it's funny because we got used to Zoom and Zoom-like interaction on TV shows even. Apple TV's Mythic Quest, the game show, came back. Apple sent them all iPhones and FaceTime, and they came back and did they concluded their season already. They did an extra episode that was all on FaceTime. Saturday Night Live did a Zoom version of Saturday Night Live.
Right.
It was so
and
weird.
the quality of all the talking head shows has just
plummeted
down ridiculously. It's now just common for people to freeze on screen, and then the commentator says, "Oh well, they just froze." So
All
now
the
we'll
time.
Just like us.
Yeah.
Just like TWiT.
Yeah, could we please take credit for being pioneers in this area?
I think
we froze first.
We froze before anybody else did.
Yeah, I've been freezing for the last 20 years. Come on.
We learned early on not to use those iPhone headphones as microphones, and I still see that on CNN and MSNBC screeching.
But Steve, I'm also, though, really happy about two things. One is they're finally getting some new voices, and people don't have to go into the studio, and that does make it limiting. And two, we get to see in their homes, and that gives us Rate My Skype Room, which makes me really happy.
Jeff is happy about that because he is one of the few to get 10 out of 10 on the Skype Room Rater.
I wasn't going there, Leo, but thank you for mentioning that.
This has been the most fun on Twitter of all, I think, is following Rate My Skype Room.
In fact, sometimes you recognize obscure hosts by their background. It's like, I remember that guy. He's got the weird bookcase. It's like, oh, okay, yeah.
Oh, the guy with the speak and say in the background, Steve? That guy?
or the blinking lights in the background. Yeah. It is, and this is something you always celebrate, Jeff, about the internet. It is democratizing because everybody's got a TV studio now in their house, for better or for worse.
I think it's generally better for TV. The other part of this story that I talked about on Twig, but that I think is my favorite story of the year, is how science and medicine adapted to this open information ecosystem.
Yes, at first we were getting a lot of preprints and bad info kind of treated as if it had been peer-reviewed. But we learned, didn't we?
Well, now the people I follow, and I have a COVID Twitter list, bit.ly/COVID Twitter list, if you're interested, where I have 600 experts, and they peer review papers on Twitter.
Wow.
They really do. And top experts whom I trust immensely go on there. And there's a so today there was a controversy where various privileged white male journalist armchair epidemiologists were criticizing CDC proposals for who should go next. And Dr. Greg Consalves, who's a top Yale epidemiologist, comes on and says why they're wrong and how, with a lot of snark, too, which I enjoy. I'm looking for what's happening in the UK with the variants now in the genome of the virus, and is it really a problem or not? I go immediately to my Twitter list, and there's a woman named Emma Hodcroft who's been studying this out of Switzerland, who's brilliant about it, who says, well, here's what we know and here's what we don't know. Science is coming directly to the people thanks to, believe it or not, Twitter.
Which you have two COVID lists, COVID community and COVID. Are you the one that
it's COVID.
COVID.
Or the easiest one is bit.ly/COVID Twitter.
Right. 632 people, and these are all people you've vetted as somebody reliable or trustworthy.
Yeah, sometimes people go off the list, but I trust the people I trust, and it's interesting how it was not that difficult to get out maybe 2 runs. I stopped there. There's Emma Hodcroft right there.
For all of the criticism I give and others give social media, this is a really interesting example of how the internet can organize information and make it useful, kind of autonomously.
Kind of the way we thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
it used to
No, I
be
mean,
you'd have
seriously.
editors and curators and people would self-designate, but somehow this is self-organized in a way that's actually become a great and useful ecosystem. Unfortunately, it's gone both ways because there's also QAnon and anti-vaxxers and all sorts of other
You've got
groups.
to we're trying to invent new institutions of credibility. But I talked to a Columbia virologist, Angela Rasmussen, who said that during the last SARS outbreak, papers took a year to get out because of peer review.
Right.
And we couldn't afford that now. Imagine the speed with which the science and the data passed around and the reviews of it has been critical to learning more.
One of the concerns early on was that people with money were escaping. In fact, there was the article, I think we talked about it from Douglas Rushkoff at the end of the summer. The privileged have entered their escaped pods. Is that still the case? Or it seems like there's nowhere you can go that's completely safe these days.
Now they're going to buy their shots probably.
Yeah, well, that's also a possibility. Preppers and survivalists said, "See, we told you." I'll see.
Boy. Just because a disaster happened doesn't mean extremism works.
Yeah.
But yeah, of course.
There are people. We talked about for a long time the decommissioned nuclear missile silos that people had turned into escape pods, little small underground apartment complexes that you'd pay millions of dollars to get into that would have their own private guard service. And I think there were some people who actually moved to these silos.
Where is Peter Thiel these days?
Yeah, but I think they're out of there by now. And it turned out most people just went to Barbados.
I was going to, if you want to do it cheaply, just move to Vermont.
Or Vermont. Vermont's a little chilly right now. I prever Barbados.
It's also a little safe.
One of the things, though, that did definitely happen because of the virus is that the social contract kind of fractured, and the fault lines that have been here all along really showed up. The difference between the haves and the have-nots, the kids who had fast internet and had laptop computers, and the kids who were forced to take beat-up old Android devices to the Taco Bell parking lot to use their free Wi-Fi so that they could go to school. That became very clear, and I'm hoping that the result of that will be that we'll do something about it instead of just muddle through until it's over and then go back to the same old.
Leo, it strikes me that the latest cruel paradox is that, as we all know now, and too late, African Americans, people of color, Latinos are the worst hit by this pandemic. And yet when it comes time to stand in line for the vaccine, when maybe the political will would finally give them the first shot, of course, having been so distrustful for a good reason, they're going to lose out again.
Yeah.
And it's a terrible paradox,
Yeah.
I think. It's just the systemic racism just hits you from every which way.
Well, and it goes back to the Tuskegee Project, where thousands of black men or hundreds of black men were not treated for syphilis and not told they were not being treated for syphilis, so we could see what would happen. And it continued into the 70s. And so as a result, I think a lot of blacks and other people of color are very reluctant to trust public health when maybe now's the time to do it. If there's anything good that came out of it, you could say Quibi, the failure of Quibi. Quibi was an
The silver
attempt.
lining.
It will be a punchline for a long time, won't it? It's like, you just say it, Quibi.
Well, like so many things, the pandemic accelerates things, and that's one of the things that accelerated was Quibi failing.
The failure of Quibi. I wonder, there's been a lot of talk about the end of cities, and after or during COVID, Oracle, Tesla, a number of companies moved to Texas out of California. There was, remember the article saying New York is over? People were leaving the city and never going to come back. Not true, is it, Mr. New Yorker? Wait a minute, you're living in the burbs. You're living in New Jersey.
I know. Listen to me. I'm out here in the woods.
Yeah. But I think that it's clear that the world will be different when we come out of this, whenever we come out of this. I wonder if people will move back to San Francisco and New York City, or if these exoduses are permanent and the beginning of something even larger.
But isn't it more than cities? Isn't it offices that?
Yeah. Well, Google has said now, not only do you not have to come back till the fall of 2021, but a good portion of your work can be done remotely, even if you do come back. Right. Twitter said you never have to come back.
One of the things that we talk about on Security Now often is the great power of inertia, and I think if nothing else, this shook things,
it kicked us in the butt,
forced people to see whether they could, for example, need to go into spend hours a day on the freeway commuting to go to the office, or if they couldn't get the job done at home. And so, before this horrible pandemic, people were doing things that they had always been doing for a long time. In some cases, retailers were still in business just because they had been in business the year before and the year before that. But there wasn't any real reason for them to remain in business except inertia. So this has sort of shaken everything. It'll be interesting to see it. As you say, Leo, my guess is we will not be returning to where we were.
No.
We'll be returning to where we need to be after the pressure to change has been lifted. We'll be somewhere else, and actually probably better.
Certainly the big tech leapt into the fray. By April, Apple and Google announced an API for COVID tracking that they were going to build into iOS and Android. A few months later, it did in fact ship. Initially, they said it'll be designed to support the apps that government and health officials might want to make for COVID tracking. But now, at least in some places here in California, the Apple system works without an app. But I put works in air quotes because it doesn't seem to do anything at all as far as I can tell. And a lot of people were very suspicious of Apple and Google and the idea that they might put tracking into a phone. Do you think that big tech is using or has used COVID as an excuse to enhance or government for that matter, enhance the tracking of people to spy more? And do you think that will go back to normal after it's over, or will they say, now that they're in the phones, oh, good, we're going to stay here? There's definitely been concern among some people. I know, Jeff, you probably
done a crappy job of it so far.
I know.
Yeah.
Steve and I did a whole show, and I think I remember it was in our best of on why COVID trackers won't work, can't work.
Right, and I guess my feeling is that the technology is now in iOS and Android, and it may be good for us to have it for next time. Because, all of the people who know this stuff are looking at the intervals between these sorts of epidemic outbreaks and are noticing that the intervals are decreasing. These are happening more frequently. We keep hearing this will not be the last one. So I think if nothing else, this is proven to be horrible, but not, the end of humankind. We'd like to prevent the end of humankind. So I would say we're in far better condition for preparedness next time. This all got everybody's attention. The fact that you got to, wear a mask wherever you go outside, and even among your own family members, that's a wake-up call.
It does feel like maybe we've gotten used to it, and maybe we've made some progress. Like this was a rehearsal, and we'll be ready next time. At the same time, don't you think, Paul, if Apple and Google leave these APIs turned on, there'll be a hue and cry in 6 months? People saying, why is it still in the phone?
Yeah, of course. But I've had the same experience. I mean, you kind of take a little survey every couple of days on your phone for some reason. It doesn't seem to do anything. And so I don't quite.
I turned on the California version. I haven't gotten any warnings.
Yeah, the efficacy of this is not clear. But yeah, I mean, there are always going to be people who trust and just think this is a good thing and don't worry about it, just like they don't worry about their own privacy online. And then there are going to be the people who won't trust anything at any time. So I don't know. It's a basic trust but verify situation, I think.
The other, I think, big technology story around COVID is the mRNA vaccines. These are very advanced, high-tech vaccines. In fact, I think a number of AIs were early on assigned the project of figuring out how to create a synthetic vaccine against COVID-19, and it worked. It worked. Anybody want to address that? I know none of you are biotech guys, but this is a
not at all. But I think it's important. There's been suspicion that this happened so quickly, but again, I think that the internet had an impact there, where there was AI, there was data, there was preparation, but it was also easier to put together the tests. The actual testing was still to spec from everything I can see, but everything else got truncated around it.
Well, also the fact that it really didn't happen quickly. It took more than a decade because the vaccines that we're using now from Mrna and Pfizer are based on vaccines for the original SARS epidemic that were created in the early 2000s. This was a technology that they've been working on ever since. So in a way, we're kind of lucked out that SARS happened, which is a very closely related virus, and the mRNA vaccines development began then. In fact, credit to the researcher who came up with the notion and was demoted at her university because they said, "Oh, that'll never work." I'm going to see if I can find her name because here it is. This is from Stat. The story of mRNA, how a once dismissed idea became a leading technology in the COVID vaccine race. Both vaccines come from research that was done many years ago. Let me see if I can find her name. Katalin Kariko spent the 90s collecting rejections. Her work attempting to harness the power of messenger RNA to fight disease was too far-fetched for government grants, corporate funding, even support from her own colleagues. She did not give up, even though after 6 years in the faculty of the University of Pennsylvania, she was demoted in 1995. She'd been on the path to full professorship, but with no money coming in to support her work on mRNA, her bosses saw no point in pressing on. She was back to the lower rungs of the scientific academy. She kept working on it, and in fact, it was her research that eventually made its way to Pfizer and Moderna. A key discovery, Kariko and Weissman figured out if you incorporate modified nucleosides into mRNA, you can kill two birds with one stone. That research paper came out in 2005, so she'd been working on it for 25 years.
The pioneers always get the arrows in their back.
Yeah.
Especially for women.
There's some talk that they both deserve a Nobel Prize in chemistry, and or maybe medicine. I wouldn't be surprised if they did. So it seems like it happened really fast, but yes, as always, there was some researcher in a closet somewhere at the University of Pennsylvania had been working on it since 1995. But again, that's technology, that's science, and it's pretty amazing. There was early on a lot of news about, of course, Black Lives Matter and the death of George Floyd was this year, and the protests in Minnesota, violent protests. According to Boy Genius Report, Minnesota was using contact tracing to track protesters as the Minnesota protests escalated. We didn't hear much more about that, but
nobody had the darn tracking app, so it probably didn't work very well.
Maybe that was it. All right, enough of COVID. We've had enough. 2021. It's
the feel-good story of 2020.
Jeez, it's not been good news, has it? Work from home. Certainly because of COVID, we learned how to work from home, and that might end up being good news. That might change the way we think of work. Certainly for us at TWiT, we sent all of our employees home late February, early March. They haven't come back except for the absolutely essential engineers who have to push the buttons and run the machinery. And that's worked out all right. It's not been perfect. You guys all work from home anyway, so
right. I've been working from home for 25 years. I mean, it's been interesting to watch the rest of the world kind of go through these issues that I kind of dealt with a long time ago. And some people can and some people can't. Some people prefer it, some people won't. I think, like Steve said, the future is going to look different, but it's going to be a hybrid work world, I think. And I think the Google schedule is particularly interesting for people who can do that.
Yeah.
Where you don't have to come in the office every day, but maybe you come in once a week or once every 2 weeks or whatever it is.
Jeff, you're teaching remotely, right? You could do
Right.
So you do your classes from the house
And Zoom.
How's that been?
I actually think that it's generally okay. The problems the students have don't have to do with the classroom time. They have to do, they're journalists. So they wanted to be out on the street, and we teach them to go and show up and be with people. And then we say, no,
Don't show up.
Maybe not.
Stay home.
Yeah. For running, having helped start a program in social journalism, this is its time, because finding people online and connecting with them through social media, that's what you have to do. So they leave with a greater expertise in that. So I've told them all, they had some rough times, they had some tender moments, but I've told them all they're going to end up just being so darn resilient from this that they're going to be able to face lots of things in life.
You're teaching older students, graduate students. Do you think
Yes.
they're better or worse able to do this?
Oh, I think probably better. Yeah,
Because they're
my
older.
daughter is in graduate school in Canada, but from upstairs, and I think if it had been an undergrad for her, that would have been a lot rougher, because the structure is different. The expectations. A lot of what college sells is not education; it's socialization.
It's
It's an experience.
It's
yeah.
a halfway
That's
house for teenagers, basically.
It's
a daycare.
Melrose 90210.
That's what it is.
It's daycare for
Yeah.
teenagers. Paul,
Yeah.
you have a daughter who is in college.
Yeah.
But she's
This was a
going to
tough
school,
year.
which is interesting.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, so she actually just flew home today for the break, and she's only had one class this past semester that was in person. It was a lab class.
So she went to UNC and stayed on campus, but was doing the classes remotely anyway.
Right. But you know what? From our perspective as her parents, we still wanted that for her, because there's still things she can do, that she can socialize with people, that the people she lives with, the people on campus, and she still gets, it's kind of like a starter college experience. And then when things
Right.
open up, she'll get more of the normal.
Is she a freshman?
Yeah.
So she had no other experience of college anyway.
Yeah, I mean, she didn't have a real graduation. She didn't have a prom.
kid.
Her start of college was delayed by 2 or 3 weeks, I guess. And,
How does she
from
like-
our perspective, it was just, we just wanted it to work,
Yeah. How
and
does
it
she
did.
like what she's doing? I mean, is it okay?
She loves it.
She
Actually,
loves it.
yeah, it worked out. You think about this. I mean, she's in a dorm where there's 2 bedrooms that would normally have 2 kids in each, and an extra room and a bathroom and everything, and it's just 2 of them in there. And so she has a room to herself. Her roommate has a room to herself.
she's spoiled.
They're living in it's a luxury situation that's not going to be duplicated next year. But
She's going to hate it next year.
I know.
I have to have a roommate?
I have to get an apartment off campus.
Yeah, I think that was the beginning of the end of my college experience. As soon as I realized I could live off campus, that was
Yeah,
it. It was
you
over.
do. Exactly.
Your real
I
life
think
begins.
That on-campus experience is important, and I think there's a reason why so many colleges require it, right? Of out of state, you can't have an apartment the first year in
Right.
many cases, and that's
Rightly so.
That's true at UNC.
Yeah.
Do the three of you think that fall will start to look like normal, that we'll be back in things like classes and offices?
I can only
Fall,
quote
like next
my
fall?
hero, Dr. Fauci, who says we'll
Yeah.
be enjoying NFL games in the fall. So he thinks
You
so.
have Mark Cuban, who owns the
Him I
Dallas
don't
Mavericks,
trust.
the NBA
Yeah.
team. Really? Oh, I actually think he's a really smart guy. But he was
Okay.
saying that and he talks to experts, he reads up on everything, and his view of this coming NBA season is that they're going to start the season with empty stadiums, and that there's going to be some kind of inflection point in March or April, and they'll be able to start letting people back in. And he's not saying they'll be full exactly, but by the time the season ends, probably midsummer next year, we're going to be approaching normal, between vaccinations and whatever else. So, we'll see.
What do you think? There's been such an anti-vax movement. There were conspiracy theories who said the vaccine was Bill Gates' attempt to inject some sort of device in your body so he could track you. I mean, they're crazy.
You thought he was all good now. He's not. It's the same old Bill Gates.
Do you think people will change their tune and get vaccinated?
Yes. Actually,
I think so too.
I do.
I'm hopeful too.
Yeah. No, because when push comes to shove, you can have. I mean, there'll always be some percentage, obviously, but If vaccination is what's standing between you and normal, it's such a small price to pay. It's not even
these members
price,
of
really.
Congress who've been doubtful, who are rushing to get it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The hypocrites are the first in line all the time.
Yeah. It's the public health says it's roughly 70 to 80% of the population has to get immunity of some kind, vaccinated or somehow, for it to work. Yeah, you know what? I bet you 70%. I bet you get the vaccine. I think when it comes down to it, it's easy and abstract to say, I'm not going to let Bill Gates track me in my arm.
Unfortunately, the one thing you saw during the pandemic, and we probably all have personal experience with this, is there were people who didn't believe this was a pandemic. There were people who didn't believe this was real. There were, and what happens
oddly,
is,
there still are, and I don't understand
of
what
course,
world they're living in. But
when people die from this, or you are impacted by it, all of a sudden the switch flips, and I think, unfortunately, because of the way things are going, more and more people are being impacted, and it's become apparent, I think, to at least a large segment of the population that this isn't a plot against the president. It's not a China thing. It's, it's real. It's a pandemic. You shouldn't be going to a gym not wearing a mask. It's just a thought.
Yeah. Well, that's what I think will be interesting to see is if people get vaccinated and then stop wearing masks, which of course public health officials say that's not the thing to do. Yeah.
Right. That's right.
It's going to be an interesting few months, quarters, years. I don't know.
But better, do we all think that next year will be better?
Yes.
Right.
God, it can't be any worse, Paul.
It's a low bar. Well, couldn't it?
Don't tempt.
Don't say that.
Don't tempt.
There could be a comet. I understand.
There could be a mutation. There could be all kinds of things.
I guess you're right. There could be.
It's also.
Go ahead.
I was going to say it's also worth remembering that for a while we were thinking, well, you get it, and if you're healthy and your vitamin D status is good, you'll recover, and then you'll be fine, and you'll have immunity. What we're learning is that this thing leaves people worse off often than they were before. It's not like a common cold that you get over and you're fine. There can be, they call it long hauler syndrome, lots of weird things that it does to you. So, at this point where we have a vaccine probably a few months away, especially for those of us in the OG group who may have some priority over the youngsters, it really does make sense not to get it and to get vaccinated.
Wow, this is like a new benefit of AARP. Get in line early at the vaccination store.
Paul, join us.
I embrace my elderly nature.
Your elderly nature, yes. Mm-hmm. Actually, Dr. Mom was telling me they might be raising it from 65 to 75. So
that's the latest is that they're going to do 75 up.
Yeah.
And then they're going to do
group 3 now, all of a sudden.
But we're going to get grandfathered in, right?
Yeah. Sure, grandfather.
It'd be a terrible thing to do to me now.
To the terms grandfather.
All right, we're going to take a break. We're covering the top 10 tech stories of 2021, although already you can see the intersection between real life and technology. In some ways, that's kind of the big story is that what was 10 years ago when the three of us started working and doing shows on TWiT was really kind of a subculture. Technology is now mainstream in every possible way. It impacts everything, and the biggest stories of the day are tech stories as much as anything else.
Which is why tech upsets some people,
like you and me. We get in a fight every time I say the F word.
I'm all right.
Yeah,
you're just one who's.
I'm not going to say the F word.
Facebook?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we have something in common.
We've reached detente. Jeff says, if you stop bringing it up, I won't yell at you. I said, okay, fine. Fine.
No,
nice.
No, but we'll do your commercial.
I got some Facebook stories coming up in a little bit. Yeah. Our show today brought to you quite literally, by CashFly. All year long, CashFly has been our content delivery network. I remember in the early days, back when Steve Gibson had hair and Paul Thurrott wasn't quite so gray, and Jeff looked exactly the same. We were trying to distribute this by web downloads. I remember going to people saying, please seed our BitTorrent so more people can listen to the show. That's when Matt Levine at CashFly called me and said, Leo, can we help? This is ridiculous. I at the time didn't really know what CDN did, but boy, was I glad to find out. CashFly has servers all over the world, servers that will cache your content, bringing it closer to your end users, whether it's a podcast like ours or a game, a video stream, software. And by doing that, it's 5 times faster. It's more reliable. In fact, CashFly has a 100% uptime SLA guarantee and industry-leading global performance, and that's really benefited us. We are big fans of CashFly. Early on, we discovered something CashFly now is offering everybody. They call it SOS, Storage Optimization System. The issue with a CDN is it's great once your content is cached on their servers all over the world, but the first time somebody requests your download from their local server, it has to go out to your origins. In our case, it was S3 or wherever it is, get it, then put it on the server, and then offer it to the customer, which means it's going to be slow. It's going to cost you money because you're going to have origin traffic. You're suddenly reliant on the public internet. What you don't want is a cache miss. That's what SOS does. It guarantees no cache misses, which increases download speeds, eliminates buffering, and can save you a lot of money in data transfer out fees. Now, we've been using it, turns out, for years. We've stored our content on CashFly. So the first thing we do when we upload a podcast, we upload it to CashFly so that when their caching servers, their points of presence need the content, they get it directly from CashFly itself through their own, peering, which means 5 times faster than the origin. Hyper fast downloads, low latency, highly scalable. That's good news. Now you can do it too. SOS is available to everybody. But the other good news is CashFly is expanding rapidly. They just added 6 new points of presence, POPs, in South America. What's great is they're serving 10 times the traffic in Latin America over the last year. And not only have they maintained, but they've drastically improved their performance in the region while taking on a much higher traffic load. This is why I love CashFly. We have listeners all over the world, wherever your end users are, North America, Latin America, the Caribbean, Europe, the Middle East, Asia Pacific. Your content will be delivered quickly and reliably with 100% uptime. They guarantee it. So check out CashFly. CashFly is giving away a complimentary detailed analysis of your current CDN bill and usage trends. Chances are you're spending 20% more than you have to. twit.cashfly.com. Bring your CDN bill or your usage trends. See how much CashFly can save. See how much better CashFly can be. And by the way, thanks to CashFly during this crisis, they've been helping the World Central Kitchen deliver warm meals. They've donated over $50,000 to serve 300,000 warm meals to people who are struggling. CashFly is a great company, great people, and they've done so much for us. To get rid of the pain of getting our content out to you, you should find out what CashFly can do for you. twit.cashfly.com. Thank you, CashFly. It's been a great 2020. Here's to 2021 together. We've got the OG TWiTs on the line here talking about the top stories of the year. I guess we have to talk about TikTok, the gift that just kept on giving. If I look at the TikTok, and I'm going to throw into this Huawei, WeChat, all of the kind of concern about the Chinese apps that might be spying on you, and I compare that to what the Russians have been doing all along with SolarWinds, the TikTok story isn't just a sideshow. It almost seems like misdirection at this point. Thoughts?
I agree. Let's move on.
The president wanted to ban TikTok. As far as we know, that ban is still in effect. They gave them a reprieve. For a while, Microsoft was going to buy it. We had Chris Capicella, the CTO of Microsoft, on this week on Windows Weekly. You asked him. By the
way, did you catch? He said something very interesting about this, which was that he was not part of the group that was discussing this. and he implied that he wasn't necessarily a fan of this idea, and that there were many in the country.
We should point out, Chris is on the leadership team. So he goes in those meetings with Satya Nadella and all he's the chief marketing officer. He's one of the top executives. Here's how I interpreted that, Paul. I thought that was really interesting too.
Yeah.
To me, that was Chris saying, this was never an
distancing
effort.
himself.
Yeah, this was not
the senior leadership team. Yeah.
Agreed upon effort by the leadership team. This is something we want. He gave reasons. Yeah, it's good. It's always good to acquire more users. Get a strong user base. Blah blah blah. And I'm putting words in his mouth here, but my interpretation reading between the lines was, you know what? This was a phone call from Satya Nadella and the president. The president said, would you be interested in buying them? And if you do, will you give me $5 million? And Nadella, serious, I'm not joking.
Finder's fee. No, I know you.
I am not joking. And Nadella
it's so ludicrous.
Politically said, yeah, of course.
Well. Now that you mention it, I guess. Okay.
Right. Because they didn't tell the leadership team. They didn't go to the board and say, hey, we'd like to buy TikTok. What do you think? It was never, my assessment.
Everyone on the board would have been like, you want to buy what?
What? My assessment of it is it never rose to that level of seriousness, or they would have told the board, they would have told the leadership team. This was politics. This had nothing to do with Microsoft and their intent to do anything. It's just very hard if you were a CEO of a publicly held company in the United States to say no to the president when he calls and says, would you do me a favor? Of course, Larry Ellison has agreed to do that favor.
That Larry Ellison is a different character.
Some people are a little more comfortable kissing the ring.
But I think, honestly, Nadella and maybe even Ellison and Walmart, all of whom have been named as potential buyers of TikTok, had the same reaction, which is, it's never going to happen. Go ahead and say yes.
Yeah.
Well,
because it isn't going to happen at this point, right?
No.
I mean, I don't know what we're going to do about the security problem that is TikTok, I guess.
Is it, though? I mean, you look at what happened with SolarWinds, and then you look at, well, TikTok might be spying on people through their location on their cell phone. It doesn't rise to the same level of...
It really doesn't,
problem.
And I just want to say this about TikTok. Being an OG, I looked at it at first and said, huh?
Exactly.
But I love what it does for collaboration. I think it's a step ahead of the rest of platforms, and that you can put up a piece of audio and people can build on it. You can put up a video and people respond to it. You can create Ratatouille the musical entirely on TikTok with choreography and costumes and songs and scripts. And it to me, it just begins to crack what I think is the true nature of the net, which is collaboration.
Which is not to say that there are not potential issues. I mean, the Congress has just banned the DJI drones again because they work with the Chinese government to monitor Uyghurs in concentration camps. Any company that is a Chinese company is going to be, potentially complicit in some...
Potentially, but doesn't it seem rather arbitrary, which that they've not randomly necessarily, but they've gone after a handful of very specific companies.
It feels political.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it.
Well, and we talk about on the podcast the fact that all of our IoT devices are connecting back to server infrastructure in China to control our plugs and light bulbs and all this other stuff. So, I mean, the reality of this exposure to global threats is real, and most of it just gets ignored until something bad happens.
You could say, the prudent thing to do would be to have no business with any other country in the world and seal our borders, but that's not practical. It's not doable. And so the proper response, it seems to me, is to weigh the risks, to deal with the most serious risks, and certainly be aware of, and I think there are diplomatic routes, the political routes that you could use to encourage China to do the right thing. I would hope we would use those.
So, Steve, what's your latest? I know you've talked about it a lot on your show, But just, is there anything new or current in terms of your view of the risks of TikTok?
I didn't hear the last.
What's the risk, Steve? What's the threat from TikTok?
Of TikTok specifically.
I have no idea.
Well, that gives me comfort.
One of the things that I know you are focused on, Jeff, is because I listened to you on This Week in Google, is the changing feeling about privacy as a function of age, where young kids are just like, oh yeah, this is, we don't care. Right. We're just putting it all online and letting it hang out there. Whereas, these OGs here are like, wait a minute, you gave them your what? So, I think it is a sort of a function of where you come from and how new this is to you.
Well, and of course, one of the stories this week.
Too.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Well, just one quick point. I think it's a really good point, Steve, and it also goes to, I think, one of the great talents of young people online and other communities online is that they create their own languages. They don't find privacy in the way we do. They hide in plain sight the things that they do, and it's true of young people. Dana Boyd has done great research on this, and I just read a book by Andre Brock Jr. on Black culture on Twitter. And there's the creation of languages and structures and understandings that if you're not inside the community, you're not going to get. And it's in that in plain sight view, which is a really interesting strategy then for how to deal with the internet.
TikTok was very savvy, too. They went to the courts to fight the Trump declaration, but they did it by getting people who make money, influencers on TikTok, to sue because they had the standing, right? And in fact, in 2 different court cases, it worked. The judge ruled that shutting TikTok down would be a significant penalty to these influencers.
The first was a First Amendment case too. This is the printing press of the people,
right?
And so it really is a First Amendment case. And whether it's in China or not, people are using it to be able to talk to the public and to have their voice. And you try to shut that off from government, that's a violation of the First Amendment.
I think it's pretty clear. Now, don't yell at me, Jeff.
I don't yell at you. You're the one who yells at me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm yelling at you. I won't yell at you on this. This was actually a story this week because Apple changed its privacy reporting with the most recent version of iOS, and there was a very long, several screens long reveal of all of the things Facebook potentially was collecting from you on your iOS app, at which point Facebook took out full-page ads in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post saying, it's not us. Think of the small business people who are going to suffer if you tell them what we're collecting. Apple said, look, we're not saying you can't collect at Facebook. We're just telling people they have the right to say no. And Facebook was up in arms. And I guess my point is, Facebook is doing, and admittedly doing, more probably than TikTok is. The only difference that Facebook is doing it as they're an American company and TikTok's a Chinese company? Is that the difference?
TikTok, there's a fear they might do something. With Facebook, they literally are doing it, right? That's one thing. But also, this Facebook protection of small businesses is like the mob claiming that if you take them down, no one will protect the small businesses on the street because that we're collecting money.
Shane, what could happen to that nice bakery of yours?
Yeah. I'd hate to see anything happen to a small business.
Kara Swisher's opinion piece in the New York Times said Facebook's tone-deaf attack on Apple. The company declared in newspaper ads it was standing up to Apple. It's a desperate ploy that's unlikely to work. She says, casting itself as a protector of small businesses in full-page ads in irony alert big newspapers, Facebook is criticizing Apple for planning to give users of its popular devices more control over the data they share with third-party apps. Think of the small businesses. That's a new kind of moral panic, isn't it, Jeff?
So just to be clear here, I agree with you on this story. It was the other story you brought that called Facebook a doomsday machine that I had a little problem with. This story I agree with. Facebook is tone deaf. They do all kinds of things that don't make sense.
Yeah.
They don't have, my biggest complaint about them is they don't operate with a North Star that you can test them against. To say, why do you exist? And we're going to test your behavior against that. Instead, they have a book of statutes You can't show a female breast unless it's attached to a kid. But why? What's the higher view of why you exist besides we're going to connect people? And that's what I've been urging them publicly on this show and in my writing to do, and they don't.
And in any event, I guess the reason I bring it up in conjunction with TikTok is they're both doing somewhat similar things. And there's always the threat that TikTok could be used somehow to propagandize American public, and you could say the same thing for Facebook. In fact, I think you could say Facebook has been used that way in Myanmar and the Philippines and other dictatorships. So is the president trying to shut down Facebook as well as TikTok, or is it just that it's a Chinese company?
230. That's where 230 comes in, and that's where his insistence on trying to kill 230. That's what I think that's going to be the battleground for next year, and where odd bedfellows come together because of the moral panic about the internet. That what suffers in the end is all of our speech.
Yes,
it's not about Facebook.
I'll back you on.
It's not about Twitter. It's not about TikTok. It's about our rights online and what's going to happen there because of this panic that goes on. And 230 is going to be the target in the next year.
Well, let's take a little break. When we come back, let's talk about that social media section 230 of the Communications
Encryption
Decency Act. Let's talk about the attack on encryption. There is a lot more to talk about as we go through some of the top 10 stories of 2020 with my top 3 buddies on TWiT. Steve Gibson of Security Now and the creator of SpinRite. I'll give you a plug, the world's finest hard drive recovery and maintenance utility. And by the way, you said that by the time we come back next week for all 3 shows, Windows Weekly, Security Now, This Week in Google, will be doing best ofs. We won't be back till the following week. You said we might have some SpinRite news, Steve, you think?
Yep. Well, we will. We're at the final release candidate for the benchmark, not for SpinRite, but for the benchmark that is the testing platform for all the new hardware drivers that SpinRite will then inherit. So this allows it to get a lot more rigorous testing so that when we do launch it in SpinRite, it'll just come out working.
grc.com. If you buy SpinRite now, you'll be in on all the beta testing and you'll get a free copy of 6.1 when it comes out soon, it sounds like. Steve Gibson, Security Now. Windows Weekly host Paul Thurrott. It's great to have you. Thurrott.com is his website. His book, The Field Guide to Windows 10, is at leanpub.com. I'm giving people plugs now, Paul. What happened to you? Wait a minute. I'm looking over your left shoulder. Your Xbox is gone. Where'd it go?
Well, let's see which side. The old Xbox is up there.
Okay. The Series X used to be over your left shoulder.
Well, it was just the box. The Series X is.
Oh, it's just the box. Never mind. The box is gone.
I'm trying to be
take
seasoned.
it away. You've robbed me of my sense of reality, Paul. Jeez.
The new Xbox is so last month.
Call of Duty. You still playing on that? They know Series X.
I am, but I'm going to be moving on pretty soon. I'm not happy with that.
It won't be part of our top 10, I don't think, but one of the big stories this week was this, maybe not surprising. It seems to be the way it is these days in AAA game releases, but the abject failure of Cyberpunk 2077, refunds being offered by Sony. It apparently does not work well on PlayStation 4 or the Xbox One.
Yep.
Like not at all.
Yeah, the most hyped game of 2020 somehow bombed immediately upon release.
That seems to be the case more often than not these days with AAA releases.
It's crazy.
The servers bogged down. The game won't work. On the other hand, on Google Stadia, it's playing fine. On GeForce Now, it's playing fine.
Right,
it seems like the best way to run these games is to not be running them, but to
That's how you get people to move to the cloud, you know?
Oh. Do you think...
It's a plot. It's a conspiracy.
Red Project is a Polish company. Mm-hmm. Do you think this is a conspiracy?
Follow the money, Leo. I don't even know what I'm talking
Where
about.
Where one
anymore.
plays, so plays us all.
Yep.
Yeah. I actually really, it's a fun game, but I haven't played it on a device because I couldn't get a PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X. Do you think people are taking the refund?
Yeah. Sony, infamously pulled the game from the store and is offering refunds. Microsoft is also offering refunds, but they're not pulling it from the store.
Wow.
I don't think there's any movement on that on the PC side that I'm aware of, but yeah, I bet people have.
I remember, every time in the last few years a big, massively online game comes out, the servers crash and there's all sorts of issues. But this is the first time I can remember it being pulled. From the store. I can't think of it. Even Duke Nukem Forever wasn't pulled. That game was terrible. Wow, so we'll talk about that when we come back in a couple of weeks on Windows Weekly, because I think that is a big story. Probably doesn't rise to the top 10 of the year.
It's not quite top 10.
Such a big story. And of course, Jeff Jarvis is here this week in Google, which really is no longer about Google at all. Mostly just about me and Jeff fighting and.
No, we don't fight. We love each other.
Yeah. And Stacy and
you baiting me and me standing up for the rights of the internet, but beyond that,
I just like to bait you. That's all. You know, I like to poke the bear. Anything you want to plug? Should I give Craig Newmark his weekly plug?
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
sure.
Jeff is the Leonard Tao Professor for Journalistic Innovation at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at the City University of New York. How's Craig doing?
Craig's doing great.
Craig was the creator of Craig's
List. Giving away a lot of money. He's extended his philanthropy from journalism and women in code and veterans. He's also worried about hunger now.
Good for him.
And is
he still involved with Craig's List? Does he still do that? Or did he sell it, or what's going on?
Craig's so great about this. I mean, he said long ago he realized what a bad manager he was. And so he hired a CEO, and he cares about the company. But he used to do customer service a lot. I think he might still do some.
Oh, that's cute.
But he hasn't managed the company.
Jim Buckmaster's been the CEO for ages.
Brilliant.
And done a good job with it. So Craig just takes the checks, and that's about it.
Craig cares, and Craig. The great thing about Craig's List is that it hasn't changed, right? I mean, it's while the internet went crazy all around it, Craig's List has been a rock. It is what it is. Pridefully undesigned.
Actually, perhaps one of the top 10 stories we should have covered is the benefactors, the gifts, people like Craig, Jeff Bezos' ex,
Mackenzie Scott.
Mackenzie, Laureen Jobs, right. These very wealthy tech benefactors have really put a lot of money, Bill Gates, into good causes. That seems to be more and more. For a long time, Silicon Valley was very much criticized for not participating, for not being charitable. Steve Jobs famously said, I'm too busy. We don't want to. I think secretly he might have been donating, but now Apple is very much in the forefront of gifts and charity. So that's probably a big story too for 2020. How much did Mackenzie Scott give away?
$4 billion. I
thought it was 4 or 8 billion.
She, and that is one of the big stories. She, like her ex, Jeff Bezos, benefited amazingly from COVID-19. Scott's the third richest woman in the world. She got $37 billion in her divorce, but it's now worth $62 billion thanks to the run-up in Amazon stock due primarily to COVID over the last 9 months. And so she decided
the thing about this is, and in full disclosure, by the way, sorry, I got money in the disinformation thing with my school from Facebook, which almost all of it we gave away. So I was kind of a short-term, for about 10 minutes, philanthropist of sorts, right? A grantor instead of a grantee. And it's hard. It's very hard work, oddly, to give away money. Because everybody's going to come after you, and you need some sense of what impact you're going to have and some sense of data around it. And, I didn't know how to do it. And I hired people who did, but it's amazing to watch how that works. This is not easy.
Yeah, very famously.
Easy to be rich, but it's hard to give it away.
Yeah, very famously, Mark Zuckerberg gave $100 million to creating an education foundation in Newark that was just kind of a flop.
Yep.
That other philanthropists matched the grant $200 million. And as far as anybody can tell, it closed its door for 5 years and with very little impact on Newark schools. So it's hard. It is hard. Bill Gates always said, I'm not going to give away money until I have the time to do it right. He started a little bit before his retirement, but I think Melinda had a lot to do with that. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has, since his retirement, not only given away a lot of money, but really done a lot of good in the world.
Been leaders.
Yeah, really been leaders. So that's a good story. That's a nice story. People like Mackenzie, Scott, Bill Gates. Zuckerberg's an interesting story because the Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan, his wife's foundation, has been more politic in its giving, if you will. I think that's a story perhaps for 2021. Our show today brought to you by Zendesk. Customer service is everything, isn't it? I mean, that's the best run companies in the world are the ones that treat their customers like what they are, the most important part of the business. And how many of us, I guarantee you, every one of us has a customer service horror story to tell. Customer service is job one if you have customers. And how many times have you been on the phone and just hung up in fury or been kept on hold for hours? Even the best teams can struggle to make their customers feel taken care of. Zendesk does award-winning support, sales, and customer engagement software that helps businesses give good customer service at scale. Because that's the problem. It's easy when your company's small and you have a few customers, but as that customer list grows, it can get harder and harder to give authentic customer service. That's what Zendesk helps you do. Create conversational, authentic experiences that keep customers happy. And you know this, when a customer, I know this, when I have a bad experience, I tweet about it. I tell the world, those guys kept me on hold for 14 hours. People will say when they have a bad experience, but similarly, I think people will tell others when they have a good experience. Zendesk gives businesses what they need to stay connected with customers, communicate seamlessly across every channel. And that's important too, because we all have different ways we want to communicate: email, phone, chat, messenger, community forums, help centers, social media. Zendesk uses that phrase, conversational experience, connected, ongoing, natural customer interactions. You don't want customers feeling like they're talking to a robot. You want them feeling like they're getting heard by humans. And that's made possible with Zendesk's complete customer profile. So when your customer service reps are talking to a customer, they know what's going on. They're not... the worst thing in the world is to be on hold for an hour with some, let's not say names, cable company, and they say, oh, well, I have to transfer you to somebody else for that particular problem, and you have to start all over again. Zendesk makes sure that each customer service rep knows what's going on. They've got a unified set of tools that give them the context they need to deliver great service in every conversation. No, who are you? What's your problem? I just told you. Most support software requires expensive consultants, months of setup. You'll love it with Zendesk. In hours, you're up and running, but Zendesk has the capability to scale and change with your needs. So it's a perfect blend of easy to set up, easy to use, but powerful enough to be flexible enough to be customized to fit exactly what you want. Zendesk gives organizations the flexibility to move quickly, to focus on innovation, to adapt to growth. It's not a surprise. 150,000 paid customers and over a decade of experience, they're pretty good at customer service themselves. No matter what you need in business, Zendesk products are flexible enough to pave the path that's best for your organization. See for yourself why the best customer service experiences are built with Zendesk. Zendesk.com/twit, Zendesk, Zendesk.com/twit. We're talking the top stories of 2020. I guess we can't forget when Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google all came to testify. Well, they didn't come anywhere. They didn't fly their big corporate jets. They just sat down in a Zoom room to talk to the House Antitrust Subcommittee. that was quite the experience. And then again, later, a strangely bearded Twitter CEO and a strangely unbearded, in fact, somebody who looks like he had never had any facial hair at all, Mark Zuckerberg, testified to the Senate. Big tech is being investigated by Washington, D.C., and of course it ended up with a antitrust suit filed against Google, an antitrust suit filed against Facebook. In fact, the only company really left out of all this scrutiny was Microsoft, Paul. What?
I know.
Did they suffer their penance 20 years ago and now they're in the clear?
They're just not as public facing as these other companies. I mean, they're just as big as all of them, bigger than most. But as writing about technology, like this kind of thing is fascinating to me. And of course, with the Microsoft case here in the U.S. and the EU case, as well as a backdrop, the parallels are just obvious, and many.
You and I think Jeff and I talked about the Facebook complaint and how well written, thoughtful, and well documented it was. Right. This is the FTC's complaint backed by 46 states, DC and Guam. I think more states are going to sign on as well. California, I think, was about to sign on.
So, by the way, I've had that reaction to a few of these. The Google case, the quality of the writing. I know it's such a weird thing to say about government, but especially our government today. But I actually pointed it out to my wife. I said, if you ever doubt that our government is incapable of intelligent acts, you got to read this paper. It's crazy. I think I found that to be very striking.
It contrasts here's why it's striking. It's so well written, so well thought out, and then you get Jim Jordan with his sleeves rolled up going, and it doesn't. The two don't seem to be related.
They're two different planets, exactly.
So there's on the one hand this kind of visceral hatred of social media by the president and Republicans because the social media dares to say, well, that's not right, or that's not true, or, and then there's this, I think, fairly well thought out and maybe even justified, probably written entirely by staffers in Congress, indictment of how big tech has gotten, how influential it's gotten, and really how predatory. Really, the issue is how predatory it's gotten with its monopoly.
The social media thing is kind of. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say I really agree with Paul in his sense of the deja vu that we're feeling. Those of us who were present during the whole Microsoft antitrust stuff, when you're hearing this about Facebook and listening to it, it's like, oh, does that sound familiar? Oh, yeah, I remember that. Oh, yeah. I mean, it really is just exactly the same abuse of power.
I've asked this on several shows, but I want to ask you guys. It's my sense that, the Microsoft thing dragged on for years, almost 10 years. Eventually, it never did settle. There was a consent decree. Microsoft said, all right. We'll let an ombudsman come and watch what we do. We'll agree not to do this again. The same thing happened in Europe. They had the browser ballot and various
disconnect IE
things. But my sense of it is the real success of the case against Microsoft was that it just made them think twice before they did some of the more predatory practices that they had done under Bill Gates.
The consent decree is what led to the rise of the companies we're now worried about, actually.
Google,
I mean, in part.
Facebook. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. A lot of people said Google wouldn't exist if Microsoft had continued its practices with Internet Explorer.
All of these companies.
Say more about that, Paul, please. I'm curious to hear more about the connection to the rise.
Oh, because, like when I entered the industry, I sort of think of myself as someone who covers personal technology. Most people that know about me think of me as someone who covers Microsoft, because when I came in, Microsoft was personal technology. It was 100% of it. And, the internet and mobile and a lot of other things have changed that. But Microsoft might have done to a nascent Google or a re-nascent, if that's a word, Apple, in the early 2000s, or a Facebook, what it had done previously to WordPerfect and Netscape and Lotus and so many others. But they were shackled, and Bill Gates in that time frame said that Microsoft would not be distracted. And if you talk to him about it now, he says, "Oh yeah, we were distracted
heavily." Yeah. And I have to think it wasn't just Microsoft, but other companies who said, let's not do that because we don't want to. We don't want the scrutiny.
Microsoft could just say, "Oh yeah, we're going to do that thing," and then the business would just disappear.
What do you
Even
think?
if Microsoft never came out with anything,
right?
What might they have gone into if they hadn't been shackled? If they'd won the case?
Well, I mean, what you can look at is what has happened, right? So, is there a company on Earth that could have built a search engine to rival what Google did? Yes, that company is Microsoft. Is there a company that already had an incredible, successful for the day mobile platform that could have taken on the iPhone? Yes, that company was Microsoft. Microsoft was 100% of the world, of my world certainly, until it wasn't, and
until 1998.
By the way, I think it's a good thing overall. I felt very strongly at the time that Microsoft should have been broken up. I was horrified by what I saw in all the testimony. In fact, one of the most horrible experiences of my life was sitting through. I actually requested any journalist could have gotten this I don't remember how many it was, 21 tape, like literally VHS tapes of the Bill Gates deposition.
Oh my God.
If you think it's hard to watch like the entire Godfather trilogy at once, I would challenge you to watch any of this. It is the hardest thing to watch.
Scintillating, he ate.
Oh, it is awful. And if there are lessons to be learned by Google today and Apple and Amazon and Facebook, there it is. Don't do that.
So do you think we'll have the same salubrious effect, the suits against Facebook and Google?
You know what? The big commonality here is that all of those companies, the four we're talking about today, Microsoft, are what they call gatekeepers. This is the challenge, and I think you'll see because of there's so much antitrust action right now and legal action against these companies. Even Apple, which is in many ways very belligerent about this kind of stuff, has taken steps this year to scale back from the cliff a little bit with regards to their relationship with developers, for example. So I think in some cases you'll see companies make changes voluntarily. I think you will see stalling. Some of these things are going to take years and years and years. But yeah, the hope is that the impact, however it comes about, it will be similar to what happened to Microsoft, which, by the way, today is literally right this second is probably the second biggest company in the world.
Yeah.
So it's not like they,
it was good for Microsoft in the long run, right?
That's right. That's right. Sometimes you need to go through a little bit of pain to get to the other side and to a better place. And Microsoft, that was forced on them. It's not something they would have done voluntarily. And we'll see, how these companies, they're all going to react in their own unique way, I guess.
So there's this kind of thoughtful attempt to figure out what's going on and what to do about it on the one hand. And then on the other hand, there's a lot of frothing at the mouth and threats against Section 230. What is Section 230, Jeff?
Section 230 says that a platform or publisher is not responsible for the actions of others on their platform or publishing platform, so that we would encourage conversation. It creates a safe harbor of sorts.
And moderation.
The sword and the
moderation, right? Yes, the sword and the shield.
It gives them the sword, which says you can choose to take down stuff. And if you miss stuff, which was part of the problem with case law before, you won't be in more trouble for trying. So please try. And you can allow conversation to happen without getting in trouble. So it gives you both the opportunity, because Congress in its last SMART Act knew that this internet was going to be a platform for conversation. And without this, if everyone were liable for anything everyone did on their platform, they would allow nothing to happen on their platform, and we'd be stuck with mass media still.
And honestly, it isn't Section 230 that is the problem for the president. That has nothing to do with Section 230. He's upset, of course, because first Twitter and then Facebook started to label some of his tweets and posts with fact checking.
Yeah, this is where we're stuck. And the paradox is the left goes after the platform saying, take down hate speech. Then they take down the hate speech, and then the right says, hey, that was my speech. and that's what Trump is basically saying.
By the way, if Twitter labeled one of your tweets as misinformation, would that cause some self-reflection? I mean, I think most people confronted by that would pause and think, maybe I'm not doing the right thing here.
They've done it so much in the last month, but I have to point out they only started doing that a couple of months ago.
That's right.
Yeah, they finally grew some.
For
That's the other
4
big story,
years,
I think, of the year.
Anything he or others posted, regardless of its absurdity, was just,
Yeah, just left hanging out there.
hanging. And it was only when they started to fact check it and say, this might not be true. You might want to look at other sources. As benign a kind of it wasn't even a slap on the wrist, a nudge, as one could imagine, that he really started to say, all right, we got to do something about these platforms.
Yeah, we got to do something about that, not about what I'm doing.
Yeah.
This is not the right approach to a problem.
And they are, by the way, to this day, they are still, he's still tweeting stuff that they are still fact checking, even now.
Well, the latest, it's so much fun, is that when he says that he won, now Twitter just started saying, the authorities say
that took
Joe
weeks.
Biden won.
Weeks.
Yeah.
It did. It happened yesterday.
Well, it happened perhaps because of the Electoral College voting.
Yeah.
That was the the final.
I think this is kind of a very specific issue about a very specific person in some ways. I don't see social media being anti-right, or Republican or whatever. If anything, they've allowed this to happen for years.
Right.
They've been very accommodating.
The president
and making a lot of money from it.
The president is well, that's another point. The president is a lame duck. We're 1 month away from the inauguration of President.
Why are we limping?
Joe, we're limping home. But do you think in the months remaining that he did threaten to veto the defense spending bill? It was passed with a veto-proof margin. It would be a very interesting thing. He still has not vetoed it. If he vetoed it and forced Republican members of Congress then to vote against him, that would be an interesting contretemps. Do you think that anything will happen at 2:30 between now and January 20th? And then the next question, maybe that's for the end of the show, but the next question is, Biden himself has said he doesn't think 2:30 is such a good idea. Will it continue to be under assault?
Yes. That's my story for next year. So, yes. Just like when you steal my numbers on Twig.
I just stole your story. So we'll talk about it. All right, hold that thought. Then we won't talk about it. We'll save that because that's an interesting
I like
question.
the dynamic you two have.
I know.
That's good.
Brothers from a different mother. Let's see. What other stories
I'm
here?
empowering you.
Oh, I know. I know a big story. I know a big story. Let me play a little video that will lead into our next story. This came from the Apple event announcing the new iPhones.
It's the beginning of a new era for iPhone. Today, we're bringing 5G to iPhone. 5G, 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 5G.
So 5G, 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 or 5G, 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 5G ultra wideband, or 5G, 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 5G,
5G, 5G, 5G.
iPhone 12 with 5G. 5G, 5G, 5G.
5G, 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 5G,
There's more 5G in this ad than there's in the world.
This isn't, the funny thing is, this is a keynote. This wasn't an ad.
5G,
This was the announcement of the new iPhones.
Well, the keynote is an ad, but
I guess you're right. It's a long form.
5G. Thank you for
Brilliant
joining
editing
us. Stay
at
safe
TWiT headquarters.
and have a great day.
So here's the question.
have a great day.
How has 5G transformed your lives today?
I test this regularly, Leo. My phone now says 5G.
Yeah?
That's what changed. Because I got to tell you, the speeds are not any different. In fact, they might be worse.
Jeff, at least you're in a metro. Do you getting the millimeter wave 5G from Verizon?
5 what?
Huh? Really, the only story that I know that was of any import about 5G this year was the burning of the 5G towers because some people thought it caused coronavirus.
That is probably in a year of incredible stupidity and raging dumbness.
That was peak
That may have been
2020
the
right there.
dumbest thing to happen in 2020, and that's saying a lot.
That's saying an awful lot.
Yep, I agree.
So,
Paul, Steve, you were going to say something?
No, I was just nodding in agreement with all of this. The whole 5G thing never made that much sense to me. It seemed like a total buzz, just a buzzword.
Well,
and it's like, okay, we're gonna have that
works?
too. It's like, good.
Like, what are we gonna do when it works? All of us, no one has truly unlimited data. What if I can download a season of shows on Netflix in 10 seconds?
That's it. You've used up your month.
I'll kill my month's worth of data in
that's it.
17 seconds.
That's a good point,
and I'm not feeling any lack of bandwidth on my 4G.
Right.
I've got enough Gs as it is.
In a way, I mean, look, there is a technology. There are several technologies that make up 5G. They're real. They're not made up. But the problem is by overhyping it, over-marketing it, buying, I don't know what Verizon paid Apple to inject the word 5G 100 times into their keynote. But that is actually done zeros in it. That's done more harm to 5G. That's just created a whole nation of people going, yeah, so what? Who cares? Right? I mean, eventually 5G could be something.
This is my wish for humanity, is that COVID never happened this year and 5G would be what we were complaining about this year.
Yeah,
right?
If only.
That would have been,
well said,
if only.
That would have been great.
Yeah. It is hard to get irate about anything when you've got COVID.
I know, it's kind of, you put it in perspective. It's like, well, 5G is stupid.
Yeah. But. Okay. That's it. That's the story. 5G. The other story, the gift that kept on giving, in a weird way, is Elon Musk.
Yeah.
There are so many. So on the one hand, Elon Musk has single-handedly revived our aspirations to go into space.
Yeah.
With amazing launches and technological superiority, and the twin landing of the rocket. Was that this year, John? That was this year. The
I know.
Recovery.
I almost come to tears when I watch a rocket come down from space and land on a platform. It is the most mesmerizing and amazing, awe-inspiring event. But the thing is, there's something about Elon Musk. I can't stand it. I can't put.
Would you ride in his rocket ship, Paul? Would you ride in his?
Would I ride in his? No, I went to the top of the stratosphere in Vegas one time and launched up, and I realized in that moment I can't be an astronaut. So no.
This is the ride that you want to take. This is the Falcon boosters, having been used to launch a rocket, coming in to land. And
it's incredible.
Just land and
just touching
down.
They're
just going to touch down.
It's like the first time you saw the space shuttle land like an airplane. And it's just, you can't believe you're seeing this happen.
So this is a miracle.
Nobody gave him any crap for one of them blowing up recently because he's done so well.
But that's the funny thing. We see those things blowing up, and Challenger goes in. But everybody agreed, no, it was a massive success. That the bringing back of the booster was a minor. That wasn't really what they were testing.
Right.
This was, by the way, the rocket that's going to bring humans to Mars.
Right.
So Elon, I mean, look at that. Those beautiful rockets landing in synchrony, it's like ballet. On the one hand is doing these amazing things. On the other hand is saying, free America now. There's no COVID. Let my workers go back to work.
I know.
It's
hard to reconcile.
He and Grimes named their new baby XAEA-12 or something. It's
a Star Wars character, isn't it?
I don't know what it is.
It's crazy.
And yet SpaceX launched 2 NASA astronauts.
Somehow
to the
he still
space
does
station.
smart things.
The Japanese astronaut who rode in the most recent Crew Dragon said it was the best ride. He's been on 3 shuttle launches. It's the best ride he's ever had. They used Baby Yoda as a zero gravity monitor. He's also, by the way, the 2nd richest man in the world now.
Oh boy.
So I just think Elon is the gift that keeps on giving. This is Elon Musk. Maybe he's P.T. Barnum. I don't know what he is. He's unique.
He is unique. Yeah. Yep.
And I'm glad he's around, but I'm not going to buy another Tesla. He also demonstrated how a Neuralink could control live pigs. He described it as a Fitbit in your skull.
It's Animal Farm come to life.
It's the strangest thing ever. They inserted a device in a pig's brain, a live pig, and then showed the pig doing something because humans told it to. It's, again, the gift that just keeps on giving. I don't know what he's smoking, but I'll have some of that.
Oh, I think we know what he's smoking.
Actually, we do know, don't we? We do. We do. This was not a good year for self-driving cars, was it? Apple seems to have pulled back. Uber sold its self-driving car division. A former Google and Uber self-driving car engineer pleaded guilty to trade secret theft and was fined a kind of an unimaginably large amount, to which he promptly declared bankruptcy. Talking about Anthony Lewandowski. Let me ask you, Steve, because you're the most geekiest of the bunch here. Is it harder to do a self-driving car than we knew? I remember in the very earliest days of the DARPA challenge. Remember this? They wanted autonomous vehicles to drive in the desert, and for the first 5 years, the cars would go 2 feet and go careening off the road. It was humorous, and then all of a sudden, not only are they completing the DARPA challenge, but they're putting people in these cars, and they're driving around Phoenix and other parts of the country. And then a self-driving car kills somebody. And then Teslas seem to keep running into things. Is it easier or harder or both to do a self-driving vehicle?
It's completely insanely impossible to even think that this should be done or it's a good thing. I mean, I'm on record years ago on the podcast saying, what? They're going to drive themselves? No, that's clearly crazy. I mean, it's been a good learning experience of, okay, so way back, I worked for several years at Stanford University's AI lab. And this was in the early 70s. And we thought we were going to, there was a cart project. It was a completely computer-controlled robot cart in 1970. And the thing we learned was that this was impossible. I mean, it was like, back in the early days of AI, oh yeah, we're going to make, smart computers that are going to be intelligent. Well, it is amazing that we have lost jeopardy to an automated machine. That's astonishing. But what these exercises in attempting to solve these problems always do is teach the people who are trying to solve them actually how hard they are to solve. And there's so much that we take for granted about what we see in our visual field and how we interpret it, from the millions of years of evolving to be able to do this for reason of our own survival, that what you learn when you try to do it with a machine is how much you take what is natural to you for granted. So, and we've talked about all kinds of games that you can play with the car driving AI, where you paint some weird stripes on the road and the car just stops because, it thinks there's a wall there. But no, there's just some particularly shaped paint.
If it's a white truck in the road, it might plow straight into it.
Because it thought it could fit under. But nope, miscalculated that a little bit.
It's funny. This is not unusual, but especially common when computers try to emulate things humans can do, that it's simultaneously easier than you think and harder than you think. Mm-hmm. A 2-year-old can recognize its mother, but a computer has a hard time, figuring out if that black person committed a crime or is a Supreme Court justice. It's both harder and easier than it seems. And we're kind of caught in that middle ground now where it works, but it doesn't work. This
really is the OG show, though. This is interesting because we're all kind of the voice of caution. Like, yeah, kids, go ahead, try it. I'm
not getting in that car,
TikTok
though.
Thing, I don't know.
Get off of my lawn, TikTok.
Getting in a car and not paying
imagining,
attention is the dumbest thing anyone does.
And yet, that's what
we don't have one now, but most of the cars I've owned as an adult have been stick shifts, and part of the rationale there is you can't mail it in.
drive. You have to drive.
Yeah, you have to pay attention to what you're doing.
That's a good point.
And I think there's some merit to that.
It's really hard to text while you're shifting into fourth gear.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good
I have
point.
a key that I have to turn to start my engine.
What?
Just,
yes.
FYI. Oh, yeah.
You're making an
you are
explicit
OG.
action. It's nice.
It's funny because my Tesla could parallel park perfectly, but it would try to pull into the median strip every time I went around a particular curve. It's simultaneously amazing and incredibly stupid.
And that's that
one
weird
of the
little
nicest
bit of unreliability.
Yeah.
One of the nicest examples of a compromise, and I've used it a lot because I think it's so cool, was the Palm Pilot's idea of asking the user to adapt a little bit to the limitations of the technology with graffiti, which was Jeff Hawkins' creation that allowed this really low power little PDA in the early days to do a perfect, P with a capital perfect job of recognizing handwriting. So what I could imagine is a future where we adapt our streets a little bit to the needs of self-driving cars.
Yeah.
If we decide as a society that this is something we really need to have, is that we need to just, remove the windows and get into a black cube that navigates us to where we're going, then
I think we have this technology. This is bumper cars.
Just make the cars a little more resilient.
Put a ring around it and
This is the black box that you're going to get into. Zoox announced its self-driving cabs just a couple of weeks ago, and literally this is what they hope to make available.
It should have a giant inflatable ring around it.
So, bury some cables down the middle of the road, and make that be the car guide, and you solve all these problems if you're willing to go, not ask the AI to do as good a job as humans do with no aid, but just say, okay, we're going to add some AI augmentation to our roads so that then they actually can do the right job.
This feels so sci-fi. Jeff Hawkins, I completely agree. I mean, he absolutely brilliant, the creation of graffiti. He then, in 2005, after Pilot, he sold Pilot and went on to found a company called Numenta. I interviewed him.
Hierarchical temporal memory, HTM.
He's trying to create chips that duplicate the function of the human brain, which is a very different process from the von Neumann architecture our computers currently use. It's massively parallel. Our brains aren't that fast, but they're so massively parallel, they're able to do things that chips can't do. So I don't know if Numenta's a dead end. I haven't heard much from them. But he's a brilliant
your Tesla,
guy.
did you use the do it Elon mode?
But I would just keep my hands.
Were you like eating a sandwich and watching a movie?
No, I wasn't taking a nap in the back seat. I was holding the wheel and I was looking at the window, because the problem is when it fails, you have to act immediately.
The problem was that Leo was in the car alone because the door kept closing on Lisa, and so she refused to ride in the car.
Exactly.
Poor Lisa. It's exactly right. Eventually, we had to create a protocol that I would not push the closed doors, but this was the one that had the falcon wings. Yeah. I had to shout, "All clear! Doors are closing!" And everybody would have to scatter because this car, which, it was laden with
was
technology.
The car jealous of Lisa?
It didn't have sensors in the bottom part of the door where your head would be. So it would like balk at opening in the garage. It would say, "Oh, it's not wide enough for me." But if there's somebody standing on her, it'd go thump right on her head. It was terrible. It was very Elon. It was very Elon. All right, another big story, and actually this is a huge story in 2020, which was Intel's self-destruction, the rise of not only AMD and amazing Threadripper technology, but the rise of Apple Silicon and ARM. Intel never got to 10 nanometer. They announced in 2020 that their 7 nanometer chips wouldn't be out for 2 more years, maybe 3. This was a company that powered the PC industry, Paul. I mean, it was Wintel, Windows and Intel, hand in hand, arm in arm.
This is a story that's actually been years in the making, and I think the M1 thing has driven it home for a lot of people. But I don't know, 3-4 years ago, Microsoft partnered with Qualcomm to have some alternative to Intel because they didn't want a monoculture. And the reason they went with Qualcomm was because AMD was, in their words at the time, circling the drain, which of course is not the case today. But, Intel is, it's so weird because they're such a huge and important and powerful company today still. I feel like they're on the edge of disappearing.
Isn't that sad?
They seem almost irrelevant all of a sudden.
What was the bad move? What was the mistake? If you go back in their history, where did it go wrong?
The mistake was probably hubris, but I mean, it was just a technical inability to scale down, down in die size, at a time where their competitors, which in this case were not actually companies like AMD, but rather the silicon the manufacturers, that have these processes that can rival Intel. And then the Apple thing is the Apple stuff is just kind of an exclamation point at the end. Apple kind of came up out of nowhere on the side, and it's been a very public story. And I think this is the thing that normal people, non-technical people not in the industry are aware of this, that all of a sudden there is this thing. And remember when Intel used to be on all the computers? They're not really
Intel
inside.
First movers also often have a problem. IBM had huge mainframes and created a market, but they're not making PCs any longer. Right. Microsoft was super strong, but is unable to make a phone. Other people have done that. Intel, basically got completely behind an architecture, this CISC, the complex instruction set, which was great as long as you had large power cords going to your devices. But the world went to battery power, and the ARM architecture turns out to be the right one for battery power. It can be far more scalable and power conserving. And so Intel, in all of these cases, there was too much corporate inertia, and one by one, these behemoths end up falling and being unable. They're just not adept enough to move as quickly as they have to. So along came ARM, and that was the right answer.
Ben Thompson wrote a good article in June. In a way, Jeff, it's kind of a form of the innovator's dilemma. The worst thing a company can have is great success. And Intel had huge success with what Thompson calls their integrated model, where they would build the fabs, they would design the chips, build the fabs. They integrated both design and manufacture. And for 35 years, profit. It was incredibly successful for them. But the success of this integrated model ended up blinding them to the model that ARM and TSMC and others were following. ARM would design the chips, TSMC would manufacture the chips. And so by separating this out, they were more nimble. It was less capital intensive. They were able to do better designs. And ultimately, by focusing on manufacture, only TSMC got down. They're now at 5 nanometers. The M1 is a 5 nanometer chip. And they're talking about 3 nanometer chips, while Intel's still stuck at 10. So it's a story told as old as time, or at least as old as the tech industry, of being too successful and then being tied into your model.
That's we just talked about Microsoft and the impact of the antitrust stuff. Intel is the hardware equivalent of Microsoft, and they didn't change like Microsoft did, right? So also the other way to look at it is, I talked about Microsoft being 100% of the market back in the day. From a software perspective, that's true. From a hardware perspective, it was basically Intel. Today, Intel is the biggest fish in the smallest pond. Mobile is much, much bigger than the PC.
Isn't that wild?
275 million computers are going to be sold this year, 2-something billion-ish mobile, smartphones will be sold this year. It's not exponentially bigger, but it's dramatically bigger. And year after year after year, Intel hasn't been the biggest microprocessor company, arguably, in years.
And they could never make mobile. They tried, and they just couldn't figure out how to do mobile.
Well, what markets have they exited in recent years, right? Mobile, 5G. They, pick everything important, and they've walked away from it.
Now, here's the funny story, and this isn't really, this is just the button on the whole thing. Every time Apple does something, it seems like Microsoft says, "Oh, we can do that." Apple came out with a touch screen, and they had the Surface. I can't remember what they call it, the Surface Table.
Surface
they
Studio.
Said, we've got that. Apple comes out with the M1 chip. Microsoft, according to Tom Warren, writing in The Verge, is now working on designing its own ARM-based chips for Surface and Surface PCs.
Well, I don't actually think this is a reaction to the M1. Microsoft has for years been partnering with other companies to design specialty chips. Microsoft has for years been making its own chips for use inside its computers, not the CPUs, but other special chips, and also in their data centers. So, I think Microsoft has tried to do what it's always done, which is partner with other companies, and that it's seeing the limitations of this, and that this didn't just happen. This story just came up.
But you don't just start a chip
they've been
design
moving
business
in this direction, right?
Yeah. And I have to say the tensions between Intel and Microsoft are age old. I remember Andy Grove saying, "Oh, if Microsoft would just do a 32-bit operating system, we make these 32-bit chips. What are they thinking?" And it's just been forever. And I think maybe that's the real key to Apple's success here is total integration. We'll do the software and the hardware. We'll build everything ourselves, or get somebody to build it for us.
How would you like to be an Apple partner today?
Yeah.
What's left that Apple doesn't make? 5G chips, I guess. Those, they're doing that.
No, they say they're designing those too. Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to replace everything.
Yeah. And actually, that's why I thought Microsoft would be hard for Microsoft to do their own chips, because how many OEMs are there that make Intel-based Windows hardware? If Microsoft doesn't sell those chips to those guys.
Yeah, but everyone's looking for diversity. When Microsoft started making Surface PCs, every PC maker on Earth started making Chromebooks. Every PC maker on Earth now has AMD-based PCs as well as Intel-based PCs. Some of them have, I would say most of the big ones have Qualcomm-based PCs as well. Everyone is kind of hedging their bets. But that's the problem with the ecosystem, and also the strength. But part of the problem, Apple just goes all in on one thing. On the PC side of the fence, the Microsoft side, everyone's, we're trying different things.
But that's the strength of the PC industry. There's diversity.
Yeah, but it's also the problem.
It's simultaneously.
It's a two-edged sword.
All right, we're going to take our last break. I want a couple of things we're going to run down. Jason Howell's done such a great job with today's show, putting together the top 10 listed. Yeah. He also ran down some of the most important products of the year. So we'll just, any thoughts you guys have, we can just run through those. And then, of course, I'll let you guys tell us what the stories of 2021 will be. Jeff Jarvis, you get to talk about section.
Where's my crystal ball?
Go get it.
Who threw it away?
Go get it. The OG TWiTs are here. And one of the reasons you guys have been such an important part of this network for more than 10 years, all three of you, some of you as long as 15 years, is because not only are you great, nice, fun, interesting people to hang with, but your insights are so great. It's what TWiT wouldn't exist without you three. So I sincerely
wouldn't
thank
exist
you.
without you, boss, and without Lisa, and without your team, which is
that's
great.
Right.
We try to pull together some of the best people we can, and I'm so happy. And of course,
honored always.
The shows that continue are the ones with the smartest folk. So I appreciate all you've done over the last years. Our show today brought to you by Forward Networks. This is looking forward to the future. Forward Networks, I talked to these guys, was founded by 4 Stanford PhD students, graduate students, 7 years ago. They were looking at the pain network operators suffered by not knowing what was going on in the network. That puffy little cloud we call the internet, it's cute to us, but you know what network engineers see? A complete fog. I don't know what's going on in there. Forward Networks developed some empathy for these network operators. They said, what if and this was their PhD project, we could develop a software-only model, a mathematically identical model of the network that you could use to reduce network outages, to improve troubleshooting, to eliminate errors. So what Forward Networks does, their advanced software, it delivers a digital twin, a mathematically accurate model of your network. It does it in software. And it gives you, this is the dashboard. If you're looking at the video, that's the dashboard. It gives you a single source of truth for the network. This is amazing. This is what you as a network engineer have been dying for. You can verify that your network is configured correctly. It's in compliance with policies. It's behaving as you intend. And here's the best part. You ready to make a change to the network? They have something called behavior diffs that allows side-by-side comparisons in one view of the current network and configuration changes and what that's going to do to your network. No more do you have to try it and then roll it back because everything broke. You will know ahead of time. Forward Networks can accurately predict the impact of a proposed change across every possible traffic path, so network operators can roll out changes with confidence. This makes sure that your network is healthy, is agile. You'll get insights with visualizations that you can easily understand. You can export, you can show others. You can automatically create an always accurate network diagram with full details about the topology of your network. PayPal used this. They as many big companies, they had lots of endpoints, lots of network stuff all over the world, and they realized they didn't know what was going on. They were about to build something. They found Forward Networks, and they said, this is it. This is the software we've needed. Anytime there's a change in the network, it's immediately reflected in the Forward Networks mathematical model. It saved them time and money. Goldman Sachs, same thing. They were we can't figure out our network. We don't know what's wrong. We're going to make changes. We don't know what the impact will be. They found Forward Networks. Now, by the way, they're the lead on their funding round, their Series C funding round. Goldman Sachs, Mark Andreessen and Andreessen Horowitz, also huge fan. People saw this is something the world needs. 50% faster resolution of trouble tickets, 90% faster fixes related to audit processes. But the most important one is 33% reduction in aborted network updates due to identified errors. And if you're having problems, imagine just searching your network, just like you would search with Google for what's causing problems. That's what Forward Networks let you do. You need this. You got to get this. Get network automation and verification for your intent-based network with Forward Networks. Your business may depend on it. You can get a demo, and it's a really cool demo at forwardnetworks.com/twit. forwardnetworks.com/twit. I was so inspired when I talked to these guys. They even have a podcast, if you want to listen, called Seeking Truth in Networking. I love that name. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. And I encourage you, if you're responsible for a network or you know someone who is, stop tearing your hair out. forwardnetworks.com/twit. No more mystery. forwardnetworks.com/twit. And we thank Forward Networks for supporting This Week in Tech. We thank you for supporting us by going there, forwardnetworks.com/twit. Now, John, press that magic TriCaster button. If you missed anything this week, we've made a little movie for you. The best of This Week in Twit Watch. Looks like Mary Jo got you to wear
Microsoft Paint ugly sweater.
Yeah.
Yes, we got the Paint Ugly sweater this year.
Next year, you know what has to happen, right?
What?
I think Notepad.
Oh,
yes.
Mary Jo.
I think Notepad also.
Mary Jo's happy.
Previously on Twit. Tech News Weekly.
CISA said, I think yesterday, that everyone should delete SolarWinds from their networks. The only way to make sure that you're secure is to take your network, burn it down to the ground, and rebuild it from scratch. God, no one wants to do that.
Hands-on tech.
The Oculus Quest 2 is a pretty remarkable VR platform, but there's just one very large asterisk, and I'm going to give you my full review.
I know what that asterisk is.
Quest 2.
Windows Weekly.
When you guys put the consoles on sale, you didn't have enough. And I'm curious if that was a strategy, like to create more demand.
The reality is, if we had great confidence that we could tell you the date, then we would. And it's a great thing for us to aspire to do much better.
iOS Today.
Should we do a little dance?
Yeah, let's do a preview.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Here we go. Oh, wow. He's really doing it now.
TWiT. You think this is easy? Just try to run a network and work out on a Pilates reformer.
How did you know? Oh, I have to thank the great Jim Cutler, his wonderful partner at Dawn, because all year long, Jim, pro bono, he's the voice of ESPN. He's the voice of many TV and radio stations all over the country. He's a commercial voiceover guy who I couldn't come close to affording 30 seconds of his time. But for the last, I don't know how many years, Jim and Dawn have provided us with announcing, especially those promos and the funny little comments at the end.
That's amazing.
He is a great friend of the network. TWiT really wouldn't exist without people like Jim and you guys, and it's really a group effort. So I'm from the bottom of my heart, I'm absolutely sincere. Thank you. I'm incredibly fortunate to know you guys and to be able to do this. It's a real privilege. So thank you. I don't even know if we want to go through all of the things that came out this year. The iPad Pro, the MacBook Air, the M1 chip, the iPhone SE. Apple announced a new, cheaper version of the Apple Watch, along with a more expensive version of the Apple Watch and an Apple Watch for seniors. There were a number of Surface, the Surface Go 2, Surface Book 3, Surface headphones 2, the Surface earbuds. This was actually the year of the overpriced headphone earbud combination, right? God, they were all so expensive. And of course, you know why? Because you can't put a wired headphone, a cheap skull candy, you bought it at the 5 and dime store headphone in any of these phones anymore. Mac OS 11 Big Sur came out, the Galaxy Note 20 Ultra, the Pixel 4a, which I think widely considered to be maybe the best phone of the year, the most expensive phone of the year, which I have one, and I don't know what I'm going to do with it, the Galaxy Fold Z2. Don't laugh at me and my $2,000
buyer's remorse
phone.
there, boss.
Oh, yeah. I did buy a Surface Duo, and I was able to return that. You know what? I think both the Surface Duo and the Fold 2 are going to be around for the Fold will be around for a long time, so will the Duo. There's something going on there, right, Paul? There's some value in that.
Yeah, I don't think we've latched onto what the real value is. Microsoft pushes this notion that when you have two different things on two different displays, something clicks and you become more productive or you become more creative. I don't think that's it. I actually, since we're all the OG TWiTs, I think we can all realize, we all agree looking at a phone, it's a little tough at this age, and having a bigger screen is nice.
I love that. Yeah. The Fold is great.
It's nice
that
if
way.
you're using it for maps in a car. It's nice if you're watching a movie, whatever. So
you're playing games. I can play Cyberpunk on the Fold, and it's nice to have a little bit. It's not huge. It's just a little
nice
bit
to have
more
something you
room.
can put in your pocket, but then you open it up and it's a bigger display.
Yeah. So far, nothing that Steve Gibson wants to put in his freezer for future, right?
Nope. I still have my Palm Pilots in there.
There's still 7 Palm Pilots in there.
All right, you need to explain what's going on there.
Do you want to explain, Steve?
Back at the time, so it's been my experience that sometimes the world moves on past the perfect solution. It doesn't just settle on the perfect solution. For example, I happen to have here within reach, that was not set up ahead of time, the most perfect calculators that were ever created by man.
He's got the, what is it, the HP, 35?
So one is the hex calculator, because I'm a programmer, the 16C, and I was using it earlier this morning. And the other is the 15C, which is the scientific calculator.
Nice.
And they're gone now. I have about 20 of these because I don't ever want to be without this calculator. It's
they're going to make a
absolutely
TV show about you
the
someday.
best one ever created.
It's called Hoarders 2.
Yeah, tech hoarders.
Now, as it happens, I was wrong about the Palm Tungsten. I have several of those in the freezer, and I don't think I'm going to ever thaw them out because, I now have an iPhone.
Explain to
and all
Paul
my
why you
needs are
put them
met.
in the freezer?
Well, both, because the battery chemistry needs to be kept cold so that it doesn't.
It's not metaphoric.
No.
Right.
Literally in the freezer. Do you have to worry about freezer burn?
No, actually, I think they're in the refrigerator because you don't want to freeze a lithium polymer cell, but you do want to cool it off in order to slow things down.
Yeah.
And it is possible to actually get fresh replacement batteries. But again, in that instance, I will not be going back to there. I used to read books, my ebooks on my little Palm Pilot. That was wonderful.
Sure.
But we now have iPhones. That's the right solution. But we have no calculators that are equivalent to the fantastic HPs.
No. Steve dreams in reverse Polish notation.
Yeah.
I bet he actually does. I bet occasionally he wakes up and just
when I was at Cal, my best friend and roommate used to say, when you talk in your sleep, it sounds real. I have no idea what you're talking about, but awesome. I always wanted him to write it, like record it or something, but that never happened.
A lot of peaks and pokes,
Steve,
pushes and pops.
You write a lot of assembly language, which is Intel.
100%. Yeah.
So do you have any? Okay. So do you have any fears about some shift away from the x86 platform?
Yes, as a matter of fact, that it's going to be a problem for me. I'm not sure what I'm going to do because everything I'm doing is x86, and we're clearly seeing the world moving away from that architecture. So, maybe the ARM will be able to emulate x86, and then it'll only be, I'll have to create drivers for non-Intel-based systems. Hopefully, I'm old enough that the x86 will last just long enough to move me out of a point where I want to be profitable.
I remember moving from 68,000, which was a very nice assembly language.
Oh, beautiful design.
And the memory architecture was, flat.
All orthogonal instruction set.
And then going to I guess it was X16. I don't know what it was, but going to the Intel platform and its segmented memory
8086, maybe.
Was written by an insane person.
Oh, my God. And it's not any better. So, you know what? You might actually embrace risk. You might say, the problem is you probably have 1,000 macros written in x86 that you're going to have to rewrite or something. I imagine.
Yeah. The thing to do would be to move to a higher level language. I would just go to C. I would make the smallest step above assembler, and that would give me some machine independence.
Actually, there was one product I remember Steve was very excited about. The Ring drone security camera that flies around.
That seems like his kind of product.
I bet he's got 20 of those, yeah.
It's not out yet, but I think, Steve, you said you're going to get one right away, right?
No.
I must have been thinking of somebody else. You don't want an autonomous drone camera flying around inside your house when you're not home.
Oh, in fact, we had fun with it, saying, what could possibly go wrong?
Right.
Yes, allow China to be steering your camera around your house while you're not home. That just really sounds like a bad idea.
I think that was the most interesting product. There was also the Amazon Halo. Amazon really came out with some very interesting stuff. The wristband that listens to you as you talk and tells you if you're a little too grumpy.
Yeah, I tried that. I was grumpy a lot.
It would make me a lot grumpier.
Mine's sitting on my dresser. I couldn't bring myself to strip naked for it because apparently that was also part of the functionality. It assessed your body fat by taking naked pictures of you and uploading to Amazon. Again, what could possibly go wrong?
I feel like you don't trust
I do remember of that flying camera that there was some concern that the thing was going to sneak up on you. And I remember saying, have you heard any of those drones with small props? I mean, it's like the end of the world approaching.
Oh, yeah. They're loud. When they make a quiet drone, that's when we should all be worried. I'm sad to say Boston Dynamics got sold to another company, the robotic dog. Now, that would have been a product that came out this year that maybe I wouldn't have mind having around the studio. No? No?
Well, it's COVID safe.
Well, you need that to protect you against that little Amazon drone thing.
Yeah. My dog is fighting my drone.
My dog took down the drone.
Oh,
exactly.
yeah. I think probably the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X would be viewed as one of the most important products of the year if you could just buy one.
Yep.
In both cases, and I guess we should throw in some of the newer NVIDIA graphics cards. These things sold out probably to scalpers so quickly that there'll be a lot of unhappy children.
Well,
coming
that makes
down
a nice projection for 2021, right? I mean,
it'll do
those
well.
Products will all be more readily available.
Will they?
Next year? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. From your mouth to Chris Capocella's ear.
Well, I mean, in the sense that they'll make more over time, and eventually the available market will be satisfied
someday. You think it'll be 2021? In fact, let's start with your predictions for a wonderful 2021. Paul Thurrott, what kind of world are we headed into?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the post-COVID world is going to be a lot like the COVID world in some ways, right? More working from home, more, 1,000 new Microsoft Teams features by the end of 2021, I'm sure.
I should have mentioned Teams as the product of the year. Yeah. They really.
Well, I mean, it's, in the Microsoft space, certainly. I mean, I think Zoom was a bigger deal. But, for Microsoft, it's the next big platform, so it's big. To me, one of the things I want to see more of that was really good this year, and there weren't that many things that were really good, but low cost, kind of high value smartphones, the iPhone SE, the Pixel 4a, like you said, or the Galaxy S20 FE, are low cost phones that aren't terrible, And I think that's an important trend, especially with all the uncertainty and the fact that people are holding onto their phones longer and so forth. It's nice to see phones in the $350 to $700 range. And I think we're going to see more of that next year as well.
And maybe
we had a theory on Twig that Google's latest, they just kind of pulled back. This is not the time when people are going to spend a lot of money on this stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't mention the Pixel 5, which would have normally been one of the big releases of 2020, but Google acted as if, they were taking a nap and they had this phone and maybe you'd be interested, but maybe not.
Yeah, but you know what? Like the 4A 5G, I think
those are great.
I think it's sold out.
Well,
I mean, they made 17 or 18 of them, but
I think the 4A was a great phone. The 4A was the phone probably we deserved last year. I don't know what Google's going to be. You know what? Google should have been one of the top 10 stories. Just Google wandering off, losing interest in life.
But they do this all the time,
and
don't
just
they?
Drifting away. It's
so how does it? I mean, I find it weird from being outside. Every fall, Google will announce some smart home products, and they have 5 or 6 of them. And then there's a week in September where Amazon unleashes about 1,100 different smart home products. So you featured a couple of them. I mean, how does anyone compete with that?
Yeah.
We did get the Blob Opera, though, from Google.
Blob Opera? You enjoyed that, yes.
Love the Blob Opera. I insisted it was the lead story on Twig.
You made it the lead story.
Leo tried to avoid me. He said it's not a democracy, but I held a revolution.
You won. You won.
Got the Blob Opera.
You won.
On the top of
it. It may not be a democracy, but you chopped my head off. That's clear.
I wanted the Blob Opera.
The Blob Opera. What about you, Steve? We didn't even mention ransomware gone wild in 2020. I think a safe prediction for 2021 is more of the same in that regard.
I think that's clear. For me, and we talk about this constantly on the podcast, the most interesting issue is this fundamental tension that exists between governments and encryption. And our right to privacy, and the fact that in the U.S., privacy is not an absolute. You have privacy and a right to have it, except if a court will give a warrant saying it's in the public interest for some particular target to sacrifice some aspect of their privacy for a specific purpose. We talk about encryptions and backdoors and all that. My feeling is that there's a different way to solve the problem, and it's going to be interesting to see next year, maybe it's going to be the year after, how this gets resolved. It's not necessary to weaken encryption because first of all, we can't. that math has already escaped. So you can do perfect encryption, but we forget that on the opposite ends of that encrypted tunnel, the data is not encrypted. So it would be entirely possible for the government to legislate that high volume consumer products like Pixel phones and iOS devices have to be warrant compatible. That is, they have to be by law, they have to be subject to a search warrant. And all that means is that you get the data either before it's encrypted or after it's decrypted under some sort of constraint. So I think the problem can be solved without weakening encryption, but just by recognizing it that there are times when encryption isn't present and you can snatch it at that point. But to me, that's one of the big issues that as a society we haven't yet come to grips with, and maybe next year.
That's a scary thought. And the thing that scares me is as usual, the only people disadvantaged by that are the less sophisticated, because hackers, bad guys, and you and I will always have encryption. The math is out there. There's nothing anybody can do about it. It's just people, normal people use iPhones and other phones will lose it.
Right.
So the bad guys aren't going to be disadvantaged.
Well, if your phone itself is able to be tapped at the keyboard and the screen, then any encryption that you apply within the phone can be snatched ahead of time. Now, if you want to send documents back and forth, then you could create a document, do your own offline encryption, and then mail it. And there's nothing anyone can do in order to crack that. But for mass market products, I can see that the government might well say, look, you've enjoyed this honeymoon period, but we have to have warrant compatible access to these devices.
There's a jump from that, though, to we've got a back door and we're watching you at all times.
Right.
I doubt that's going to happen. First of all, that's a lot of bandwidth, a lot of storage, and a lot of people watching what you're doing. It's much more likely that they just say, but at any point, if we should decide we want your phone or we want your account, we can go and get it and see what's on there. But
exactly.
Yeah, but I think things like encrypted messaging platforms and so forth are probably going to continue on. I don't see how they can stop Signal. I don't know. You're right. This will be a big story in 2021. I agree with you. Jeff Jarvis, your big story for 2021.
It's going to drive me nuts, and I'll be screaming on the show and having fits that have to calm me down and give me drugs, but it's going to be regulation.
Regulation, I agree.
230, I think.
So you think Biden will continue to pursue, really Congress initiated it, so Congress is clearly going to pursue those.
It's an interesting thing because one, I know he's getting advice to say, hold on, hello,
slow down,
OG,
yeah,
hold on. There may be other ways to look at this, but there's a pincer movement against tech, and the problem is, I think what's going to happen is at some point the progressives are going to wake up and look and realize that they're on the same side of some of this as the Trumpists, and that's not going to be a comfortable place to be.
Yeah.
And freedom of expression for communities too long not heard in mass media is what I care about most. But we got 230 here. In the EU, we have the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, which are going to come in, along with UK regulation on antitrust and also on digital harms is coming up. Australia has its Murdoch law, trying to go after them. We have all kinds of things I think are going to be happening in the next year. And the platforms, my problem is that they're the ones who need to defend the internet, and they're the worst defenders of the internet. And that's what bothers me.
Yeah. It's, right now it's a politically volatile situation. Maybe that'll get less so in January, and then maybe calmer heads can prevail. But I think that the investigations the FTC and Congress have initiated, those are not going away. The EU, Margrethe Vestager has become more and more aggressive. Those aren't going to go away. So yeah, this is going to be the year of reckoning for big tech.
There's a book coming out in March. I just read for blurbing purposes by Neeraj Weisblatt, who's a researcher at, I think it's USC or UCLA. I suddenly forget which one. And about the techlash and when it started. And we'll talk about it when the book comes out. But it's we ought to have her on. It's a fascinating bit of data as to when media just suddenly did a 180. And it wasn't what I expected.
A story for next year that I think is going to be interesting is one that's been developing this year, but I think is going to take off next year, which is the advent of streaming. Of course, this was the year streaming gaming got precedent. In fact, Cyberpunk 2077 seems to be only playable on streaming services like GeForce Now and Stadia. A Google engineer has said we have ported Stadia to iOS, so they've gotten around Apple's restriction on streaming gaming by just making it work in the browser, and apparently worked quite well. This is Thumper, which is working in Safari on the new version of iOS in beta and working in real time. But it isn't about gaming in the long run. It's about things like Windows Virtual Desktop. I suspect that more and more of our computing will be done with a thin client. Maybe that's why the Fold is so interesting, because that could be your thin client, not just for gaming, but for Windows, for your operating system. Amazon has put Mac Minis on AWS. Soon you'll be able to use a Mac and Mac OS over the cloud. I think that's going to be a big trend in 2021. And it's going to very much change how we think of computing and desktop computing in particular. And I'm hopeful, Steve, I think one of the things that's driving this is ransomware and security. I'm hopeful that these professionally managed operating systems in the cloud will be more reliable and more secure than they'll do a better job than we have been doing on our systems at home.
Plus,
in the office.
5G. Don't forget 5G.
And 5G is going to make it all possible. I should have just said that.
This show is brought to you by the magic of 5G.
This is the year of 5G. It is the year of...
I'm not leaving 3G, Jarvis. You're the OG,
What's
and I'm
wrong
sticking
with
with
Edge?
3G. It's good enough for me.
I like
Steve has some 3G in his refrigerator. That he'll...
3G. And then, of course, it's the year of the Linux desktop 2021.
Yes.
Yeah, very important. Paul Thurrott.
I want a new Chromebook.
From Google. You want the real one?
I want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't blame you. Paul Thurrott, thank you so much for being a part of our family, for being here today to end the year. Windows Weekly on Wednesday will be our best of episode, and I will see you in, I guess it won't be the new year. I'll see you for one last show on January 30th. I mean, December 30th. And we'll do our wrap up of the year, you and Mary Jo.
Just don't go on too late, Paul, because it delays us, okay? All right?
I wanted to apologize publicly for what you probably endure every week. It's sorry.
Oh, good. They're on the beer.
Yes, when we hit beer, it's time for you, Jeff Jarvis.
I'm ready to drink. Yeah,
host of This Week at Google, along with Ant Pruitt and Stacey Higginbotham. One of my I always consider you one of my best friends that I never get to see in real life, but it's always a pleasure to see you.
We're going to change that
every Wednesday on This Week in Google. Thank you for all you do. And for keeping me honest and spanking me from time to time.
And me, and this sounds like an S&M show, but we're gonna go off of this. We're gonna stop that.
And
Paul
Steve
says we have an interesting dynamic, and that's what it is.
Now I'm even more interested.
Let it be an interesting dynamic. I'll get the paddle, you get the straps. And then,
whoa,
I don't know. It got weird at the end there. And actually, somebody I've known longer than almost anybody.
The OG of OGs.
The OG of OGs.
The God of gods, the expert of experts.
Steve Gibson, who I first met in the late 90s, who is, of course, our host at Security Now. And also, I think for all of us, a mentor and an inspiration. And the guy who keeps us safe.
Yes. When 300 baud was the speed at which we telecommuted.
God, that's right.
No one needs more than 300 baud.
God. You can't type that fast. It can keep up with typing. So that's all you need.
You guys are the greatest. Thank you for making TWiT what it is. Thank you, dear listeners and dear viewers, because there'd be no point in the chat room. There'd be no point in doing this if if you didn't watch and listen. We're very, very grateful. I know it's been a hard year for all of us. Thank you for hanging in there with us. I think 2021 is going to be a better year, as the Who said in Tommy. I got a feeling 21 is going to be a good year, but we got to see it in together. Thanks for joining us. Another TWiT is in the can.